Section 1. The Kool-Aid Man Paradox, a walking lawsuit with no answers. There is a giant sentient pitcher of cherry-flavored drink mix who lives somewhere in a Rhode Island coastal town, and nobody in that town seems to think this is worth discussing. He has a house. He has a living room with a couch and furniture that presumably fits his proportions, though the logistics of furniture shopping when you are a 6-foot ceramic vessel filled with liquid would themselves make an interesting episode that the show has never produced. He apparently has a romantic relationship with a Yoo-hoo chocolate drink bottle, which raises its own set of deeply complicated questions. He smokes cigarettes? He sits in that living room, going about his day in the way that a being of his particular nature goes about a day, and he waits. He does not have a job that anyone can identify. He has no visible source of income. What he does have is a compulsion so overwhelming, so deeply embedded in whatever passes for his psyche, that the moment he hears a sequence of people saying the phrase, "Oh no," in close enough succession, he is physically compelled to burst through the nearest wall, scream his catchphrase into whatever room he has just demolished, survey the awkward silence that follows. And then this is the detail that stays with me: slowly back out through the hole he just made. Not run, not disappear, not apologize or offer to pay for the structural damage. Just slowly, sheepishly reverse himself back through the rubble, like a man who has walked into the wrong meeting and is hoping everyone will pretend it did not happen. That is the Kool-Aid Man. That is his entire established existence in the world of Family Guy, across decades of television, and it raises so many questions that the reasonable thing to do is start at the beginning, which means the very first episode of the entire show. He appears in Death Has a Shadow, the pilot, which aired the 31st of January 1999, right after Super Bowl 33 in one of the best debut time slots American television offers. Peter Griffin is standing trial for welfare fraud. The Griffin family has erupted in dismay at the judge's sentence. Each family member screams, "Oh no," in turn. And then, from somewhere beyond the courtroom wall, from outside the building, from wherever he was positioned at that moment, presumably on the lawn or the sidewalk adjacent to the Rhode Island courthouse, the Kool-Aid Man comes crashing through. Plaster and drywall and structural material explode outward as he enters. He shouts, "Oh yeah," at the top of his ceramic lungs. He looks around. Nobody in the courtroom seems pleased. A long, particular silence settles over a room that has just had a large flavored beverage mascot come through its wall. And then the Kool-Aid Man backs out. He reverses himself through the hole he made, slowly, in the way that someone backs out of a room when they have opened the wrong door and found something they were not supposed to see. The first question, and it becomes more interesting the longer you sit with it, is why he was anywhere near a courthouse in the first place. The episode does not establish that he was inside the building. It does not suggest he was in the hallway or a waiting room or any interior space. The Kool-Aid Man crashes through an exterior wall, which means he was outside when those consecutive sounds registered. He was on the grounds, or on the street, or in the general vicinity, and when the trigger phrase fired in his nervous system, or whatever the equivalent is for a ceramic liquid-filled mascot, he ran directly at the wall and through it. This means there is a question about his daily behavior the show has never answered. Does he wander? Is there some radius within which he monitors human speech for the trigger phrase? Does he position himself near public buildings, where people are statistically more likely to say, "Oh no"? Courthouses being excellent candidates given the frequency of devastating legal rulings and wait there the way a spider waits at the center of a web? If so, is this intentional positioning or instinctive? Does he know why he does it? Or does he simply find himself drawn toward places where the odds of hearing his trigger are favorable, the way you might find yourself standing near a bakery during your lunch walk without fully deciding to go there? And what is his life like in the long hours between incidents? The show gives him a domestic life that implies something happens between the wall breakings. He has a house. We see the inside of it in the Season 4 episode Peterotica, where he is shown sitting in his living room when a car crashes through his wall, the show's reversal joke, the Kool-Aid Man experiencing what it is like to be on the receiving end of sudden structural violation. In that scene, he is just sitting there. He is in his home. He is not waiting for a trigger phrase. He is existing in a domestic space, which means he has downtime, he has a routine, he has whatever passes for a private life when you are a beverage container who smokes cigarettes and dates a chocolate drink bottle. The financial implications of his wall-breaking habit are genuinely enormous, and the show has never addressed them. Courthouses in Rhode Island are not built with thin drywall. They are masonry, brick, reinforced in ways that meet building codes for public institutional structures. The cost of repairing a breached exterior courthouse wall accounting for structural assessment, materials, labor, and the permits required to perform that work on a public building is not a small figure. The Kool-Aid Man has breached this specific courthouse at least 3 confirmed times across the show's history. Judge Blackman, in the episode Stewie Kills Lois, is explicitly and publicly annoyed enough to address the entire courtroom and ask people to stop saying, "Oh no," because every time someone does, the Kool-Aid Man comes in and breaks the wall, and the judge is tired of it. This means the courthouse has developed a policy around him. The Rhode Island judicial system has adapted its courtroom decorum to account for a recurring beverage-based intruder who enters through walls rather than doors. Someone in the municipal bureaucracy of this fictional town has filed structural repair claims related to Kool-Aid Man incidents. There are insurance complications. There are building code implications. There are conversations in the facilities management department that are uniquely uncomfortable. All of this is implied and none of it is shown, because the show's interest in the Kool-Aid Man extends precisely as far as the joke and no further. Is he being sued? Has anyone presented him with a bill for the cumulative damage? Has the town attempted to establish a restraining order keeping him away from public buildings where people might say, "Oh no," in groups? These questions are absurd in the way that all good questions about this show's background logic are absurd, but they are the questions that arise when you take seriously the premise that this character inhabits the same civic reality as everyone else. His apparent near immortality is another layer of the mystery. In The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair, Evil Stewie, a more purely malevolent duplicate generated by a cloning machine, experiments on the Kool-Aid Man's triggering mechanism. Evil Stewie impersonates multiple people saying, "Oh no," until the Kool-Aid Man arrives. Then Evil Stewie shatters him with a bat. Not damages, shatters. Completely. And then licks the juice off the floor, which is one of the most genuinely disturbing images in a show that has produced a lot of competition for the position. And then the Kool-Aid Man appears in subsequent episodes, apparently fine, with no explanation offered for how he survived being shattered and floor-licked by an infant. He may be immortal in a limited sense, capable of surviving, shattering, capable of reforming, capable of continuing after physical destruction in a way that regular beings cannot. His immortality may be as unstated a fact as his wall-breaking compulsion, just accepted as a property of whatever he is. Or the show simply does not maintain the death as a continuity fact, which is equally likely. He goes home after every courtroom appearance. His cigarette burns down. His Yoo-hoo girlfriend is presumably somewhere in the house. And outside, in the town, people are having conversations that include the phrase, "Oh no," and whether those conversations are close enough together to trigger the response is a matter of proximity and timing that nobody has mapped. He waits. He exists in the particular quality of suspension that belongs to anyone with a compulsion they understand and cannot stop. And somewhere on a street near a public building, the next group of people is gathering, and none of them know what they are about to do. Before we go further, drop a comment with where in the world you are watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. And if these mysteries are your kind of thing, subscribing is free and keeps these videos happening. All right, let us keep going. Number, Section 2. The Chicken Fight Chronology, Why Ernie Can Never Truly Die. If you wanted to explain Family Guy to someone who had never encountered it, you might describe a show about a bumbling Rhode Island family, their talking dog, their evil genius infant. You might mention the cutaway gags or the celebrity appearances. But if you wanted to convey something essential about what the show is at its most structurally committed, you would describe what happens every few seasons when a giant anthropomorphic chicken steps into frame near Peter Griffin. Because what follows is one of the most elaborately choreographed, deeply personal, completely unexplained recurring events in the history of American animation. His name is Ernie. We learn this in the Season 5 episode, No Chris Left Behind, when his wife, also a chicken, apparently a well-adjusted person given her domestic circumstances, uses his name during a restaurant dinner intended as a peace summit. Before this, production materials and the fan community called him the Giant Chicken or the Giant Fighting Chicken. But Ernie, despite never speaking during the fights themselves, those sequences are scored to music and played as pure kinetic choreography has a life. He has a spouse named Nicole. He has at least one child young enough to attend local preschool, as a throwaway comment from Stewie in a later episode establishes. He appears to hold a social standing that allows him to make restaurant reservations in a normal Rhode Island town without incident. The official, show-confirmed origin of the feud is established in Season 2's Da Boom via flashback. Peter is approached by Ernie, who offers him a coupon. Peter examines it and discovers it has expired. Peter's response is not measured. He does not say that's too bad or complain to the coupon issuer. Peter attacks Ernie. He assaults a giant chicken over a slightly outdated promotional document. And this single act launches a feud that has now consumed decades of television history, resulted in catastrophic property damage across multiple locations, killed dozens of bystanders who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and fundamentally reshaped the geography of one fictional Rhode Island town. There is a time travel wrinkle. In Meet the Quagmires, Peter goes back to the early 1980s to fix an unrelated personal mistake. While at a dance event called Enchantment Under the Sea, a deliberate Back to the Future reference, Peter is dancing in his characteristic way, with complete physical abandon and no awareness of anyone around him, and he accidentally punches Ernie in the face. A younger Ernie, who at this point has done nothing to Peter and has no established grudge, Ernie is furious. A friend holds him back and says not to get so upset, because he will probably never see this person again. He sees him again, constantly. The time travel punch means that Peter hit Ernie before Ernie gave him the coupon. Did Ernie give the expired coupon as a response to having been punched by a stranger at a dance years earlier? Did Peter's time travel mistake cause the very feud that has dominated his life? Did Peter create the entire catastrophe by going back in time to fix something else? The show does not address this because addressing it would require treating the chicken fight mythology with more seriousness than the comedy needs. But the question sits there for anyone willing to look at the timeline carefully. The fights themselves follow a structure so consistent it feels ritualistic. Peter is going about his day, driving, talking, eating, and then he sees Ernie. The moment of eye contact is sufficient. Whatever the narrative was doing simply stops. It pauses. What is about to happen is not a fight scene that exists within the story. It exists alongside the story, in a separate dimension of escalation that the regular plot has no jurisdiction over. They fight across enormous geographic distances. The first major fight in Season 2 takes them from the Griffin house through sewers, onto a subway, into a building under construction, onto an airplane in flight, and eventually to a Ferris wheel. Buildings are destroyed. Vehicles crash. Multiple bystanders suffer clearly fatal injuries in the background, and nobody stops to help them because the gravitational pull of Peter and Ernie's conflict has exceeded any obligation to the people around them. Peter wins. He always wins. Ernie appears dead. Peter limps back to whatever was happening before, battered and covered in debris. And then, in the final seconds, Ernie's eye opens. He survived. He is healing. He will be back. This pattern repeats across every major fight in the series. Ernie is shot, stabbed, drowned, blown up, thrown from tremendous heights, and on one occasion has his brain physically impacted by kitchen equipment. He recovers from everything. The show presents this as background fact rather than mystery, but when you sit with it, the question becomes difficult to ignore. What is Ernie? One episode, spoken almost as an aside, has Dr. Hartman mentioned that he once attempted to clone a chicken and the result was a hostile, man-sized creature. This throwaway line in an episode about kidney transplants is the closest the show comes to providing a scientific framework for Ernie's existence. If it is true, it recontextualizes everything. Ernie may not be a naturally occurring creature. He may be a medical accident, brought into being by the same doctor who treats the Griffin family, walking around with an experiment's rage coded into his cells. The dinner scene in No Chris Left Behind is the pivot point in the Ernie mythology. After the third major fight, by which point both Peter and Ernie have forgotten what they are actually fighting about, Ernie makes an unexpected decision. He takes Peter to dinner. He brings Nicole. He introduces himself by name for the first time in their entire history. They eat. They talk. Ernie apologizes for the coupon. The dinner is going well. Something like peace seems possible. Then the bill comes. Peter insists on paying. Ernie insists on paying. Something is said about Nicole. A fight breaks out in the kitchen with cookware. Ernie suffers severe head trauma. His eye is open at the end of the episode. He is going to be fine. The peace lasted one dinner. The coupon that started all of this was for a free meal at a restaurant, and a meal at a restaurant is what ended the closest thing they ever had to resolution. Seth MacFarlane has said in DVD commentary that he originally intended for one of the later fights to permanently kill Ernie, but was convinced to keep him alive for a planned Family Guy movie that has never materialized. Ernie survives not through any in-universe biological logic, but because the business side of entertainment decided he was worth keeping. He lives because he is valuable. He heals because the writers need him available for the next time the story calls for a 10-minute action sequence with no dialogue. The video game Family Guy, Back to the Multiverse, establishes that a version of Ernie exists in at least one alternate universe, which suggests the giant chicken is not a random product of this specific timeline's circumstances. He may be a constant. In some form, in some version of events, Ernie and Peter are always in conflict. The feud may be a fundamental property of whatever universe the Griffins inhabit, rather than the result of any particular set of causes. An expired coupon, a punch thrown backward through time, a restaurant bill that could not be settled peacefully. These are the documents of a conflict that has consumed more screen time than most of the show's dramatic arcs, caused more collateral damage than any war depicted in the show, and never moved toward resolution in any way that stuck. Ernie's eye opens. It always opens. Number, Section 3. Brian Griffin's age problem, and the timeline that refuses to cooperate. Brian Edward Griffin is described in official materials as a 10-year-old white Labrador retriever. He drives a second-generation Toyota Prius with the Rhode Island license plate Bry Dog. He attended Brown University, which is a real Ivy League institution in Providence that has presumably processed and graduated a talking dog at some point without making a significant public statement about it. He has been working on a novel for the entire run of the show. He drinks more than he should. He has complicated romantic feelings about a woman who is technically his owner's wife. And somewhere under all of this, the question of how old Brian actually is has become one of the show's most genuinely confusing ongoing puzzles. In Season 1's Brian in Love, Brian says, "I'm 7 years old, and if I play my cards right, I got 7 more years ahead of me." 7 years old. Approximately 7 more years to live. This gives a total expected lifespan of 14 years, which is biologically reasonable for a Labrador Retriever. The breed typically lives between 10 and 14 years. Here is the first complication. 7 dog years in popular usage converts to approximately 49 human years. 7 times 7 equals 49. Brian, at the show's start, is physiologically middle-aged by human standards. He should have the energy and ambitions and romantic approach of a man in his late 40s, not a young adult, and yet he occupies the social position of someone considerably younger. He goes on dates with the optimism of someone in their 20s. He has literary aspirations that feel fresh rather than defeated. He approaches romantic possibilities as though he has time left for them to work out. The show uses his dog year age when useful. The episode Underage Peter in Season 14 has Mayor Adam West raise the local drinking age to 50. Because Brian's dog year age places him above that threshold, he becomes the only member of the friend group legally permitted to purchase alcohol. The joke works because the show commits, in that moment, to taking the conversion seriously. Then it ignores this in subsequent episodes because the joke has been made and the consistency is no longer needed. The tracking of Brian's stated dog age across the series creates its own problem. He is 7 in Season 1. He turns 8 in Long John Peter. He turns 9 in Bry Robot. He turns 10 in Cootie and the Blowhard. These birthday episodes establish a progression. Brian is aging in dog years, slowly, with one birthday acknowledged per some interval of seasons. But the show premiered in 1999, and these birthdays extend into the 2020s. If Brian is currently 10 years old, he was born around 2014, or 2015. This is well after the Season 1 episode where a 7-year-old Brian said he had 7 more years to live. The Brian of Season 1 and the Brian currently described as 10 cannot both exist in the same continuous timeline. The show has never acknowledged this irreconcilability, because the show is not in the business of addressing irreconcilability when it conflicts with what the current episode needs. Brian's parents were conventional animals. His mother Biscuit lived on a farm in Austin, Texas. His father Coco was a guard dog. Neither spoke. Neither walked upright or maintained literary ambitions. Brian is the anomaly in his own family, the one litter member who emerged with full human consciousness. His cousin Jasper also speaks and walks upright and maintains a human-adjacent life, so the capacity exists in his family lineage. But what produces it? The show has never offered a genetic, supernatural, or any other framework for understanding how a dog line occasionally produces a being like Brian. The most devastating moment in Brian's engagement with his own mortality comes in Season 8's bottle episode Brian and Stewie. Brian reveals he keeps a gun in a safety deposit box. He keeps it because he thinks about ending his own life not as an immediate plan, but as a thought that visits him. The awareness that his lifespan is finite in a specific, predictable way, that his best years are probably behind him, that whatever he has not accomplished with his time is becoming less accessible. Stewie tells Brian how much he means to him. It is one of the show's genuinely moving moments, and it is immediately followed by a scatological joke because this is still Family Guy. Brian's death in Season 12's Life of Brian, hit by a car, dying on the street surrounded by his family, and his revival 2 episodes later in Christmas Guy, when Stewie uses time travel to go back to the moment before the car hit and saves him, is the most significant event in his timeline and also the most revealing. Seth MacFarlane announced afterward publicly that it had been a trick. The death was an experiment in audience response. And this reveals how the show actually thinks of Brian's mortality, as a theme to visit emotionally and then set aside, not as a trajectory to be followed to its conclusion. He is aging. He is dying. The show will never follow through on either. He drives his Prius. He drinks his martini. He tells people he is working on a novel, somewhere between 7 and 10 years old, somewhere between 49 and 70, in whatever human equivalent calculation the current joke requires. He is both approaching the end and nowhere near it, in a state of suspended biological uncertainty that matches the show's own suspended narrative, uncertainty about what it actually wants this character to be. Section 4. The Stewie audibility question, a mystery the show solved and then unsolved. There is no question more fans have asked about Family Guy, over a longer period of time, than who can actually hear and understand Stewie Griffin. Seth MacFarlane has confirmed it is definitively the single most asked question about the show. He has answered it multiple times. The answers have not been consistent with each other. The episodes have contradicted whichever answer was most recently offered. And the show eventually addressed the question directly in a Season 19 premiere that simultaneously clarified and remuddied everything. In Season 1, the premise appears relatively clear. Stewie Griffin is a 1-year-old baby who speaks in complete, sophisticated adult sentences. He has a British accent. He uses vocabulary impressive from a doctoral candidate. He discusses his plans to kill his mother with the clinical detachment of a military strategist. And the adults around him appear not to hear any of it. They look at him with the expression of parents who see a baby making baby sounds and respond to the baby making baby sounds the way parents respond to babies, with encouragement, affection, and complete unawareness of the content. The dramatic irony that results is foundational. The audience knows. The adults do not. Stewie can threaten Lois with specific details about how he intends to end her life, and Lois will pick him up, hug him warmly, and say something like, "Is somebody hungry?" While Stewie's expression conveys the frustration of a criminal mastermind whose monologues are being received as babbling. Brian is the immediate complication. From their very earliest scenes, Brian responds to Stewie with full comprehension. He does not look confused. He engages with Stewie's statements as statements he argues back. He agrees or disagrees. He tries to talk Stewie out of things, which requires understanding what the things are. Their entire relationship, which became the emotional backbone of the show in its middle and later seasons, is predicated on mutual intelligibility. Without it, they have no relationship at all. Chris Griffin is the next established case, and is less consistent than Brian, but more consistent than the rest of the family. Multiple episodes confirm Chris can understand Stewie at least some of the time. He sometimes reacts to Stewie's comments in ways that only make sense if he heard them clearly. This happens without any apparent rule governing when Chris is tuned to Stewie's frequency and when he is not. Peter's case is the most maddening. The show has gone back and forth on it so many times that every argument about Peter's ability to hear Stewie is simultaneously supported and undermined by the show's own canon. There is Brian in Love, where Peter responds with a slightly confused, "Yeah?" When Stewie sarcastically asks whether they can light up and watch pornography, a reaction that only functions if Peter heard what Stewie said. There is Inside Family Guy, where Peter says explicitly, Thank you, Stewie, who I can understand in direct address. There is Dead Dog Walking, where Peter admits he can understand Stewie from time to time. Intermittent reception, variable, present sometimes and absent other times. Lois's inconsistency generates the most discomfort for the show's internal logic, because her not hearing is the most important to the setup. The entire premise of Stewie threatening to kill Lois depends on Lois not knowing. If she consistently heard and understood the death threats, she would have responded, whether with alarm, therapy, or a call to Child Protective Services is a separate question, but she would have responded. The fact that she does not suggests she does not hear. But Lois has been shown responding appropriately to specific things, Stewie said in multiple episodes, caught off guard or offended by content she should not have been able to access if she truly could not hear. MacFarlane's two different answers to the question represent two genuinely different conceptual frameworks. In the first, everyone can hear Stewie, but no one takes him seriously because he is a baby. The comedy shifts. Every scene where Lois ignores Stewie's murder plot becomes a scene about parental condescension rather than parental ignorance. She heard him. She processed it. She categorized it as toddler nonsense and moved on. This makes her more culpable. The later version of the answer, Brian always understands, Chris sometimes does, Peter and Lois basically do not, but the rules flex for jokes is the honest one. It admits the show is operating without a consistent framework and making individual choices per episode based on what produces the best gag. The season 19 premiere, Stewie's First Word, approaches this directly. Stewie says a word, a profanity, delivered in a moment of extreme emotional stress, and for the first time, everyone around him hears it clearly. Brian is baffled. He has understood every word Stewie has said for years. Why has this particular word penetrated where nothing else did? Stewie offers, I was feeling such intense emotion in the moment, and that one word somehow just burst through. Emotional amplitude as the mechanism for audibility. This retroactively creates a framework for the show's entire history, with Stewie's hearing not a rule about who can and cannot hear him, but a threshold system where his words are always present but only break through into adult consciousness when they carry enough emotional charge to force the barrier. The murder plots and domination speeches do not penetrate not because they are not being said, but because they are delivered with such practiced calm that they do not carry the emotional freight necessary to register. This does not explain Brian, who hears everything regardless of emotional content. He does not need Stewie to feel something deeply in order to hear him. He simply hears him, has always heard him, and why specifically Brian can access Stewie's speech when the emotional amplitude explanation would not account for their ordinary, low-intensity conversations remains without an answer. The best available hypothesis is that Brian and Stewie both exist at a similar remove from the normal world. Brian is a dog with a human's consciousness living a human's life. Stewie is a baby with an adult's consciousness trapped in an infant's developmental stage. They are both creatures living in the space between categories, and maybe the shared experience of being not quite where you are supposed to be creates a common register that neither of them shares with anyone else in the house. The mystery will not be definitively resolved because resolution would require the show to commit to a rule it has spent 2 decades enjoying the freedom not to have. And the question continues to be the most asked question about the show, which tells you that the ambiguity is itself a kind of engagement, a hook that keeps viewers thinking and arguing, season after season. Number, Section 5. The Multiverse and What It Tells Us About the Primary Universe. In Season 8's Road to the Multiverse, Stewie produces a device that allows travel between parallel dimensions and demonstrates it by taking Brian on a tour of alternate realities. The episode won a Primetime Emmy for individual achievement in animation, was watched by over 10 million people on initial broadcast, and is consistently cited as one of the best things the show has ever done. It is also considered carefully one of the most philosophically unsettling things the show has ever done, because it establishes something about the primary universe of Family Guy that the show has never directly addressed. This is not a good world. There are better ones. There are many of them. They are theoretically accessible. Stewie describes the multiverse theory correctly and in detail. Infinite parallel universes coexist with the primary one on parallel dimensional planes. Each diverges at the moment of some historical difference, a decision made differently, an event that did or did not occur, a small change that cascades into large ones. The divergences range from subtle to radical. The first significantly explored universe is one where Christianity never arose. Without the medieval church's suppression of scientific inquiry, humanity had an additional 1,000 years of unimpeded research and development. The result is a world of flying vehicles, cured diseases, architectural structures that would appear miraculous from our perspective, and a version of Meg Griffin who is beautiful and well-liked. Stewie explains that without the Dark Ages, the scientific renaissance happened a millennium earlier, and every subsequent century of human advancement compounded on top of that. This universe is demonstrably better, by almost any material standard, than the world the Griffins live in. No disease. Technology that eliminates most of the hardships the primary universe's characters deal with constantly. A general quality of life that makes the Griffin family's particular struggles look not like inevitable aspects of human existence, but like specific failures of their specific world's history. The show visits this universe and notes it as a place Stewie and Brian have passed through and moved on from. But the implication is enormous. The primary universe is not the optimal outcome of human history. It is just the one where this specific family lives, and these specific things are funny. The Disney universe is probably the most beloved segment among fans, and it contains the episode's quietest emotional punch. Everything is rendered in the luminous, harmonically perfect style of mid-20th century Disney animation. Everything sings. The colors are saturated, and in this universe, Meg Griffin is a beautiful princess, valued and loved by the world around her, in the kind of story that ends with recognition, rather than the ongoing humiliation that is her experience in the primary universe. Stewie notes she is still considered ugly in her own world, but she carries herself with the confidence of someone who belongs to her story. For a few seconds of screen time, the audience sees a version of Meg who has not been ground down. This is not played as a joke. It is the show using the multiverse format to show you what she could be, what she is, in some dimension before closing the window. The dog world is where Brian makes his only real request in the episode. In Dog World, dogs are the dominant species, upright and articulate and property-owning, while humans are kept as pets, cheerful, affectionate, treated with the warm condescension that dogs in the primary universe receive from humans. Brian encounters a version of Peter Griffin who is his pet in this world, overjoyed to see Brian, with the simplicity and absolute trust of an animal who has a person it loves. Brian, who has lived his entire life as an anomalous dog in a world built for humans, finds something close to peace in a world where he is the baseline. He wants to stay. This matters enormously as a character moment. Brian, given the option, would leave his entire life, his relationship with the Griffin family, his writing aspirations, his friendship with Stewie for a world where being what he is does not require explanation or apology. He is always going to come back because the story requires him. But the knowledge that he reached for an exit and only missed it because the device broke lives in the background of every subsequent scene, even though the show never addresses it again. The multiverse also establishes that a version of Ernie the Giant Chicken exists in at least one alternate reality, suggesting the chicken fight antagonism is a constant rather than a contingency, not something that happened to Peter Griffin, but something true of whatever universe Peter Griffin inhabits. Certain relationships may be inevitable, regardless of the specific causes the particular timeline generates. Most importantly, the multiverse episode makes visible something the show usually keeps implicit: narrative choice. The universe the show is set in is not an accident of physics. It is the universe the writers chose to inhabit. By showing you the alternatives, the healthier, more technologically advanced, more Princess Meg inclusive alternatives, and then closing the door on all of them, the episode reveals that the Griffin's world is a deliberate selection from among infinite options, chosen because this is where the show the writers wanted to make takes place. The mystery of why anyone would choose this universe, given the available options, is one the show answers by simply continuing to exist in it. Number Section 6. Death himself, the Reaper with an ankle injury and a mother. Death comes to the Griffin family's town the same way he comes everywhere uninvited, carrying his scythe, wearing the traditional hooded robe, and behaving like someone who finds the work moderately tedious but is committed to its importance. The difference between the Grim Reaper of Family Guy and the Grim Reaper of mythology is that the Family Guy version has a mother he lives with, finds it genuinely difficult to meet women, apparently participated in films during an earlier period of his existence that he is not proud of, has lost his gag reflex as a result, and in Season 2's Death is a Bitch, sprains his ankle chasing Peter Griffin, an injury that temporarily suspends the rules of death for everyone in the vicinity and requires him to convalesce on the Griffin couch in a Providence College sweatshirt borrowed from their closet. He is voiced primarily by the late Norm Macdonald, whose flat, measured, almost bored delivery makes death feel less like a cosmic force and more like a senior civil servant who is genuinely trying to do a good job in a bureaucracy that is occasionally unreasonable. He does not seem to enjoy the work in a theatrical way. He is not dramatic or cruel. He arrives, performs the collection, moves on. The administrative efficiency of it is its own character definition. The sprained ankle in Death is a Bitch is the foundational text for understanding what death actually is in this universe. When death is incapacitated, he cannot collect souls, and because he cannot collect souls, nobody can die. Not just Peter, not just the people nearby. Apparently nobody, anywhere. This establishes that death is the mechanism rather than just the observer. When he is physically incapable of performing his function, the function does not happen. People can suffer lethal injuries and survive them. Peter jumps off a building for a bet, lands, and gets up intact. This is an enormous philosophical claim embedded in a Season 2 comedy episode. Mortality itself, in this universe, is not intrinsic to biological life. It is outsourced. Every person who has ever died in this universe's history has died because death specifically came for them. There is no death by physics, no mortality by biology, only death arriving and performing the collection. If death were perpetually incapacitated, everyone would live forever. The universe's mortality is essentially one ankle sprain away from being suspended indefinitely. The deal Peter makes with death during this episode, some arrangement about Peter's own soul, is never honored in subsequent seasons. Peter dies multiple times in later episodes, and death arrives without any apparent awareness of or reference to the agreement made in Season 2. This is a continuity failure, but it is also a data point. The show treats death as a recurring device rather than a consistent character. When death is needed, he appears with whatever version of his history serves the current episode. The deal from Season 2 simply is not maintained. The show's wiki notes something extraordinary. Death is responsible for human beings, and when dogs die, he sends a canine version of himself, a dog reaper, to collect them. This means there is a full parallel death bureaucracy for the dog population. Brian Griffin, who is a dog but lives as a human, presumably falls under canine jurisdiction. When Brian died in Life of Brian, it was not the main human-oriented death who came for him, but the dog Death, a being never shown on screen but who apparently exists somewhere in the cosmic organization chart. Death has a mother. She appears. She is disappointed in him in the way that mothers often are. There is something about this detail that is both funny and strangely humanizing. The force responsible for ending every life on Earth goes home and deals with a mother who wonders why he does not call more often. It domesticates the infinite in a way specific to this show's sensibility. The universe's most powerful inevitability has a mom. She probably worries about him. Does he age? Can he die? If Death dies, the role requires a replacement. Stewie, in fan extended content, attempts to claim the position. The premise reveals something the show maintains at a conceptual level. Death's role is not intrinsic to any particular entity. It is a position that can be filled. A toddler can, in theory, apply for it. Death is on the couch in a Providence College sweatshirt, watching television, and for a moment he seems genuinely relieved to have a place to sit and a reason to stop working for a while. The universe's oldest and most relentless force is taking a break. He has a bad ankle. Nobody is dying tonight. And he is, in whatever way is available to the concept of death-wearing borrowed athletic wear, okay with that. Number. Section 7. The Griffin family finances the house that nobody knows how to own. The Griffin family lives in a 2-story house at 31 Spooner Street in a fictional Rhode Island coastal community, and the question of how this house is paid for has been answered 3 separate times by the show, with 3 completely different answers that cannot simultaneously be true, producing a financial mystery that is either an elaborate ongoing joke about fiscal unreliability or a genuine continuity failure that nobody in the writer's room has cared to resolve. The house has 4 bedrooms. In any New England coastal community, extrapolating from real Rhode Island real estate norms, A 4-bedroom, 2-story house would be worth somewhere in the range of $400,000 to $700,000 or more. This is a substantial asset. This is not something that a shipping department employee at a regional brewery maintains without either a considerable nest egg, an inherited windfall, or ongoing external subsidy. The show's first explanation appears in Season 2's Missionary Impossible. Peter and Lois bought the house using settlement money from a lawsuit against a condom company. A defective condom resulted in an unplanned pregnancy. They sued, they won. They bought the house on Spooner Street with the proceeds. This is presented as actual backstory, real information about the Griffin family's history. The second explanation arrives in Season 13's Herpy the Love Sore. Peter and Lois have been renting the house all along because their income is insufficient for home ownership. The joke that requires this information works in the moment, but it directly contradicts Missionary Impossible. If they bought the house with settlement money, they are not renters. If they are renters, they never bought it. One of these must be wrong. The third explanation, from Season 17's Throw It Away, is the most interesting and the most destabilizing. Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's father, wealthy in the way old money families are wealthy, has been paying the Griffin house's mortgage for the entirety of Peter and Lois's time there. Carter, who has never concealed his low opinion of Peter or of the life Lois chose, has apparently been quietly subsidizing that life from behind the scenes. This last explanation has the most interesting psychological resonance. Carter's contempt for Peter has coexisted all along with a financial relationship that makes their household viable. He disapproves of the marriage and has been funding its infrastructure simultaneously. This retroactively changes the dynamic of every scene where Carter has been dismissive or condescending to Peter. Carter has been holding something over Peter without Peter's knowledge, the knowledge that without Carter's subsidy, Peter's version of his life would not be financially sustainable. Peter's employment history creates its own puzzle. He begins the show at the happy-go-lucky toy factory as a safety inspector, a role whose irony the show exploits consistently given Peter's relationship with risk. His boss, Mr. Weed, dies in Season 3 when Peter swallows a dinner roll and causes Mr. Weed to laugh himself to death, which is simultaneously one of the most unusual workplace fatalities in television history and not the most unusual death in the show's orbit. After this, Peter ends up at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery in the shipping department, where he works for the bulk of the show's run. The rough range of a shipping department clerk's salary at a regional Rhode Island brewery is between $35,000 and $55,000 annually. For a family of 5, 6, if you count Brian, and given that Brian uses the television, refrigerator, and car, he probably should be counted. This is a constrained budget. Enough to eat and have utilities and maintain a modest lifestyle. Not enough to sustain the pattern of impulsive large purchases Peter regularly makes. The projects and schemes and adventures that come and go each episode. The house's physical architecture contains its own mysteries. The living room carpet changes color between seasons, yellow in earlier episodes, green in later ones without comment. The pictures behind the couch are not consistent across episodes. Stewie's bedroom, a standard residential child's room in a 4-bedroom house, contains technology of a scale that makes its dimensions physically impossible: weapons, time machines, devices that exceed what could fit in any residential space. The basement appears when needed with a layout that changes based on plot requirements. The attic contains a panic room that was apparently installed before the Griffins arrived, raising the question of who the previous owners were and what they were worried about. 3 explanations for ownership, none of them confirmed as the definitive one. The house sits at the center of the show's financial mystery, containing its characters and their stories, belonging to someone, probably everyone and no one simultaneously. Number. Section 8. Mayor Adam West and the governance of an impossible town. For 17 seasons, the governance of the Griffin family's town was handled by a man who believed zombies posed a genuine municipal threat, who spent $100,000 in public funds investigating who was stealing his water. The water was draining into the sink as designed, who sent the entire local police force to South America to rescue fictional characters from a 1984 film, leaving the town temporarily without law enforcement, and who commissioned a gold statue of Dig M. Frog, the Sugar Smacks mascot, using the town's budget in a way that presumably required some kind of line item on a municipal appropriations document that nobody questioned. His name is Mayor Adam West, voiced for the entirety of his run by the actor Adam West, who played Batman in the 1960s television series. The character emerged from a version of West that Seth MacFarlane had written for a 1997 Johnny Bravo episode, where West appeared as a fictionalized version of himself with similar delusional qualities. MacFarlane found West's performance so specifically funny, the particular way West delivered conviction about impossible things, that he created a permanent version of it for Family Guy. How does he keep getting elected? This is the foundational question. He is not presented as a new mayor. He is an institution. The town has apparently elected him repeatedly, despite his governance being a series of expensive disasters. The gold statue of a breakfast cereal mascot, the cemented graveyards, the police force dispatched to South America on behalf of fictional characters. At some regular interval, the citizens have had the opportunity to vote for someone else, and they have consistently not done so. This means either the alternatives were worse, or the population has concluded that his particular dysfunction is familiar enough to be comfortable, or there is some quality that reads as sincerity and leadership to a sufficient number of voters. The latter possibility is supported by one of the more interesting details the show has offered about his psychology in Dr. C and the Women. The show introduces the possibility that Mayor West is not actually insane at all, that his bizarre behavior is a deliberate performance designed to distract people from a genuinely dark and possibly murderous side of his personality. This is played as a joke. The episode does not fully commit, but the suggestion lands and stays landed. If Mayor West has been performing eccentricity as a smokescreen for 2 decades, if every statue and every cemented cemetery is calculated misdirection, then he is one of the most sophisticated political actors in the show's universe. The $100,000 spent investigating stolen water was deliberate waste, performed publicly to reinforce the impression of a man too confused to be dangerous. The gold statue exists as a monument to a misdirection campaign, rather than as evidence of genuine confusion. And the Quahog citizens who have re-elected him every term have been successfully fooled by someone who understood that appearing harmlessly confused is the most effective possible political cover. The show does not confirm this reading. It cannot without making Mayor West a villain in a way the character was never designed to be. But it introduces the possibility and leaves it there, coloring every subsequent appearance with a slight unease that was not there before. Adam West died the 9th of June 2017 from leukemia. He was 88 years old. The show handled his passing with genuine care. Mayor West died off-screen in the season 17 finale, and the season 18 premiere renamed the town's high school in his honor. The school had previously been named James Woods Regional High School, after the actor James Woods, who appeared as a fictionalized version of himself in the show. The renaming from a living celebrity's name to a recently deceased mayor's name represents 2 separate naming events in the school's history. 2 different school board votes, 2 different generations of stationery, 2 different generations of graduates. No other fictional high school in television history has had this particular trajectory. Wild Wild West, played by Sam Elliott, briefly occupied the mayor's office afterward. He is profoundly different, calm, Western in the cowboy film sense rather than the Batman actor sense. He is a placeholder, which is the honest assessment. The role was built around Adam West's specific willingness to be earnest about impossible things in a particular register, and that register is not transferable. The Office continues. The character who made it interesting is irreplaceable. The town's geography under Mayor West produced physical evidence of his tenure that presumably still exists. The cemented cemetery, sealed against zombie egress as directed. The gold statue of Dig M. Frog, occupying some public space. The structures of decisions made by a man who may or may not have been performing his own confusion are embedded in the town's physical environment. The subsequent mayor has never, as the show has depicted, ordered their removal. The town lives with the evidence of Mayor West's governance, the way all towns live with the evidence of their histories, by gradually incorporating the strange things into the background of the normal, until the gold breakfast cereal mascot statue is just part of the landscape, and nobody remembers it was ever remarkable. Number, Section 9. The Quagmire Age Labyrinth. A man out of time in every direction. Glenn Quagmire's driver's license, visible in the episode Foxy Lady, gives his age as 61. The show establishes this as a fact. 61 years old. Born, by extension, somewhere in the mid to late 1940s. The explanation offered for his apparent youth: he looks considerably younger, which the show depicts as the generally agreed observation of people who meet him, is that he eats a significant quantity of carrots. Carrots, in the Family Guy universe, appear to have anti-aging properties of a magnitude that would be worth considerably more than any airline pilot's salary if bottled and marketed. This would be a straightforward piece of character background, except that it is completely irreconcilable with other specific age-related information the show has provided. In Season 13's A Fistful of Meg, Quagmire describes a youthful sexual encounter with a woman named Tracy Bellings that he situates in 1986. If Quagmire was born in the late 1940s, he was in his late 30s in 1986. A late 30s sexual encounter is not typically framed as youthful in the reminiscent sense the episode uses. The framing implies a young man's memory college-aged or early 20s, which would put his birth in the mid-1960s. 30 years separate the two possible birth dates, and the show is apparently committed to both. His military service adds another layer. Quagmire was a Navy pilot, held the rank of ensign, and met Peter Griffin during this period. Peter is described in various episodes as born in 1956 or thereabouts. If they served as contemporaries, which the show implies, Quagmire cannot have been born in the late 1940s without being significantly older than Peter during service. The show presents them as peers. The peer relationship implies similar ages. Similar ages imply a birth year much closer to Peter's. Quagmire's father, Ida Davis, originally Dan Quagmire, before gender confirmation surgery, is described in Transfat as having undergone surgery at the age of 61. This surgery occurred well after the Foxy Lady episode where Quagmire himself is listed as 61. Father and son have the same listed age at different points in the show's history, which is mathematically impossible unless the floating timeline has done something genuinely strange with both characters simultaneously. His illegitimate offspring constitute their own demographic mystery. The show has confirmed Anna Lee Quagmire, delivered to his doorstep and given up for adoption. Lucas, in Madrid with a mustache and a ponytail. Courtney Quagmire, whom Quagmire nearly pursued romantically at a reunion without realizing she was his daughter. His total count of known children is approximately 4, and his total count of potentially unknown children is implied to be considerably higher. The Courtney situation deserves its own moment of attention. Quagmire, at what appears to be a high school reunion event, meets a young woman he is interested in pursuing. She turns out to be his daughter. The episode resolves before anything further happens, and the full horror of what almost occurred is treated as comedy. But the implied backstory is that Quagmire had a child during his high school years who grew up without knowing her father, and that her father's subsequent romantic history was so extensive that he was capable of walking into a room and not recognizing his own genetic offspring. His marriage to Joan, in I Take Thee Quagmire, ended through a mechanism unique even by Family Guy standards. Joan was controlling, and by the episode's end clearly dangerous. Her death occurred when she grabbed onto Death's physical form, while Death happened to be nearby on another collection. Contact with Death, literal physical contact, killed her. This implies that Death has a contagious quality, that touching him transfers mortality in some accelerated way. Quagmire's marriage ended not through any decision he made, but through an accident of cosmic proximity that resolved his problem for him. He is 61 years old. He was a young man in 1986. He has a son in Madrid. He has a daughter whose name he did not know until nearly too late. He served as a Navy ensign with Peter Griffin in a period his age makes difficult to precisely locate. His father underwent surgery at 61 well after Quagmire was documented as 61. He eats a significant amount of carrots. These facts pile up into a portrait of a man whose timeline is as carefully unmaintained as his record of romantic partners, extensive, loosely documented, and full of consequences he has not fully mapped. Number Section 10. Meg Griffin's real father, the identity mystery behind a throwaway line. The line is brief. It arrives in Season 3's Screwed the Pooch, in a moment the show does not treat as significant, and it has haunted the fan community for more than 20 years. Brian Griffin, in response to a question about Meg's biological father, mentions a man named Stan Thompson. The name is given without context, without backstory, without any establishing scene or follow-up, just the name. And then the show continues. Stan Thompson has never appeared in Family Guy. He has no confirmed appearance, no described physical traits, no history beyond that single mention of his name. He exists entirely in the negative space around that reference defined by absence rather than presence, meaningful precisely because he is never elaborated on. He is the biological father of the show's most mistreated character, and the show has never decided to do anything with him. The implications, taken seriously, are significant. If Brian's casual naming of him is accurate, if Meg is biologically the daughter of Stan Thompson rather than Peter Griffin, then Peter has spent the entirety of the show treating as his daughter a girl who is not biologically his. This does not excuse the treatment. Nothing excuses the treatment, but it creates a context for the particular quality of some of Peter's cruelty toward Meg, the possibility that on some level, consciously or not, Peter has always processed Meg as not fully his, as the evidence of something that happened before him or outside him, and that this has colored how he relates to her even if he has never articulated it to himself in those terms. In Season 14's Peter's Sister, the show offers a different framework entirely. Peter was abused by his sister Karen during childhood. The cycle. Peter was the family's punching bag growing up, and he has recreated that dynamic with Meg, directing at her the diminishment and cruelty that was directed at him. This is psychologically coherent and does not require biological distance between him and Meg. The following episode resets entirely, and the abuse continues as before, because the show cannot commit to any explanation long enough to allow it to change anything. The Meg is Stewie's biological mother theory, which originated on Reddit and spread into entertainment coverage, proposes that Meg had a relationship and became pregnant. The pregnancy was concealed within the family, with Lois pretending to have given birth. The evidence presented includes the time reversal episode Yug Yilimov, in which Stewie ages backward toward his birth, and the identity of the person giving birth is technically ambiguous from the episode's perspective. The holes in this theory are real, the conspiracy required would be enormously fragile, and the show has depicted Stewie's birth from Lois's perspective in multiple other contexts. But the theory persists because it engages with something real about the show, the sense that the Griffin family's biological relationships are less settled than they appear. Mila Kunis, who has voiced Meg since Season 2, has spoken about the strange personal dimension of voicing someone whose name became shorthand for a particular kind of contempt. People would approach her in real life and use Peter's dismissive phrase toward her, directing at the real woman, the fictional father's habitual dismissal. The fictional cruelty became social vocabulary that operated independently of the show. The character's abuse became archetypal enough to generate its own idiom in the culture. Stan Thompson is somewhere out there in the implication of one throwaway line in Season 3. The show has never sent anyone looking for him. He exists as the unanswered question at the center of the Griffin family's most complicated and most mistreated relationship, the absent figure whose presence or absence might explain everything about why Meg has been treated, the way she has been treated, and who the show has chosen, over and over again across more than 20 years, to leave absent. Number. Section 11. The Giant Chicken's Civilian Life. What Ernie Does When Nobody Is Fighting. Ernie the Giant Chicken has a wife named Nicole. He has at least one child young enough to attend local preschool, as a throwaway comment from Stewie establishes in the episode Yug Yilimov. He has a name that his wife uses at dinner in a normal Rhode Island restaurant where he apparently has a reservation. He has a house, he must have one, because he has a family and a domestic life and a level of stability that implies a fixed address. He has some kind of social standing that allows him to function in a community. And between the catastrophic city block spanning, bystander casualty generating fights with Peter Griffin, he lives his life. We just never see it. This is the fundamental Ernie mystery at its quietest level, not the origin of the feud, not the mechanics of his apparent immortality. Those are interesting questions about Ernie as Peter's antagonist. The more quietly interesting question is what Ernie is when he is not Peter's antagonist. What is his Tuesday morning? What is his relationship with Nicole like in the long stretches between dinners that end in brawls? What does his child think of him? Does the child know about the fights? In a town where the Kool-Aid Man is a civic institution, where a baby has a weapons laboratory in his bedroom, and where the mayor built a gold statue of a cereal mascot, Ernie's existence is probably not even in the top 5 strangest things happening on any given day. He is strange, but he is strange in a world that has made its peace with strange. That context makes his civilian life almost plausible. A large chicken who works at something, maintains a household, takes his kid to preschool, makes dinner reservations, and periodically has catastrophic street fights with a large man. The Dr. Hartman cloning line, the throwaway mention in New Kidney in Town that Dr. Hartman once attempted to clone a chicken and produced a hostile, man-sized creature is the piece of Ernie's backstory that, if taken seriously, reshapes his domestic life as well as his fighting. If Ernie is the accidental result of a failed experiment, he did not have a childhood in any conventional sense. He did not grow up with parents. He emerged, at whatever size and with whatever capacities the cloning process produced, and then constructed an existence from there. The marriage to Nicole, the child, the restaurant reservations, all of it was built by a being who had no model for what domestic life looks like beyond whatever he observed and decided to emulate. The fact that he has produced anything resembling a stable domestic arrangement, given the circumstances of his creation and the ongoing disruption of his periodic combat, suggests remarkable resilience or remarkable determination. He goes to restaurants. He makes reservations. He sits across a table from his wife and tries to have a civilized dinner with the man who attacked him over a coupon many years ago. The piece does not hold. But the attempt is made, and the attempt is the more interesting story than the fight that follows. There is a Valentine's Day special that briefly shows Ernie at a gathering with what appear to be his parents and a girlfriend, this predating or complicating the established Nicole relationship in a social context that has nothing to do with Peter Griffin. He is just at an event, with family, participating in an ordinary social ritual. It lasts approximately 10 seconds of screen time. It is the closest the show has ever come to seeing Ernie as someone who has an existence independent of the feud. The fights are spectacular. They are among the most memorable set pieces in the show's history. But the fight takes minutes. The rest of Ernie's existence takes years. In the ratio between spectacular violence and quiet domestic ordinary, the ordinary wins by an enormous margin. We have seen him fight. We have not seen him live. And the living, given everything we know about the circumstances of his creation and the persistence of the feud and the extraordinary quality of his existence, is probably the more interesting story. His eye opens at the end of every fight. He gets up. He goes somewhere. His wife is waiting, or his child is at the preschool, or there is a reservation to make for a dinner that will probably end badly, but that he makes anyway, because the alternative is not making the reservation, and he is the kind of creature who makes reservations, who tries, who assembles the elements of ordinary life from extraordinary circumstances with more care and consistency than the show has ever given him credit for. Number Section 12. The show within the show, Family Guy's deepest meta-mysteries. Family Guy has developed, across its run, a complicated relationship with its own existence as a television program. Characters have acknowledged the audience. The writers have inserted jokes about the show's declining quality into the show's own dialogue. Peter Griffin has spoken directly to viewers. Stewie and Brian have used time travel to observe themselves in the pilot episode from the outside. The show's own format has been commented on from within by its own characters. At its most self-aware, Family Guy becomes a text that is simultaneously the show and a commentary on the show, occupying both positions without fully committing to either. The most structurally interesting expression of this is Season 10's Back to the Pilot. Stewie and Brian travel back to the events of the show's first episode and observe the Season 1 versions of the other Griffins. The contrast between who those characters were in 1999 and who they are by Season 10 is embedded in every scene. The Season 1 Peter is not yet cruel in the specific way the later Peter is. The Season 1 Stewie is genuinely dangerous, focused, organized, with a clear plan. The Season 1 Brian is the voice of reason rather than the pretentious failure he has become. The episode uses the time travel premise to produce a moment of unexpected honesty. Stewie observes the younger version of himself and notes that the original Stewie is more coherent, that he knows what he wants and is pursuing it with something resembling a strategy. The Season 10 Stewie is more emotionally complex but more directionless. The time travel device, intended as a comedy format, briefly becomes a tool for genuine character archaeology. The observation about cutaway gags is the episode's most honest self-critique. During a cutaway, the characters in the main scene simply stand around in silence, frozen, waiting for the cutaway to end. They have nothing to do while the show goes somewhere else. They are paused in narrative time. The main scene is suspended while an unrelated gag plays out in a different location. In early seasons, cutaways were short and main stories strong enough that the suspension was barely perceptible. In later seasons, when cutaways grew longer and main stories grew thinner, the suspension became the defining experience of watching, the sense of waiting for the story to resume, of actual content being held hostage while something unrelated played out. The episode Inside Family Guy depicts the Griffin family as participants in a scripted reality program, a show also called Family Guy, that they are aware they are performing. This reading, taken seriously, suggests that every incident the audience has witnessed is staged. The chicken fights are agreed upon in advance. The Kool-Aid Man's appearances are cued by a producer. Brian's death and revival was a rating stunt in multiple senses in the show's fiction, and also in the show, within the show, the Griffins are performing. The inconsistencies in canon are not continuity errors, but production choices made by the fictional show's fictional producers, who change the rules about who can hear Stewie and whether the house is owned or rented based on what serves the particular episode's dramatic needs. This interpretation is unfalsifiable and explains everything, which is usually a sign that an interpretation is more fun than useful, but it sits comfortably inside the show's own precedents. Stewie's time machine is the most consequential unaddressed element in the show's entire mythology. It exists. It works. It has prevented Brian's death. It can access any moment in history and change it. And the suffering that the show inflicts on its characters continues because the time machine is only deployed when the plot needs it to be, which is infrequently relative to how often terrible things happen. Stewie uses it when he cares enough. He does not use it to prevent Meg's accumulated suffering because he does not care enough about Meg. The tool is filed away in the corner of his bedroom next to the weapons collection, available whenever the show needs it and irrelevant whenever the show does not. This is the deepest meta-mystery of Family Guy, not any specific unexplained event or character contradiction, but the meta-condition that produces all of them. The show exists to be the show the writers want to make, and the characters exist to serve that show. And the mysteries and contradictions that accumulate are the natural byproduct of the writers prioritizing the current joke over the accumulated past of what has been established. The floating timeline, the reset button, the selective use of memory and consequence, these are not failures of craft. They are the craft, operating in service of a specific kind of comedy that is not interested in the constraints of consistency. The Kool-Aid Man is backing through a hole in a wall somewhere. Ernie's eye is opening on the floor of a kitchen. Brian is somewhere between 7 and 10 years old, driving his Prius, thinking about the novel. Stewie is 1 year old and has been 1 year old for more than 25 years. The mayor commissioned a statue. The house belongs to someone. Stan Thompson has never called. Death is watching television in a sweatshirt, his ankle elevated on the couch. These mysteries do not resolve when the screen goes dark. They wait, the way all good mysteries wait, for the next time someone is willing to lie quietly in the dark and think about them long enough to feel the weight of the questions rather than the absence of the answers. That is the invitation these videos exist to offer. The questions are real, the mysteries hold. The town keeps going, just past the edge of the frame, doing whatever it does when nobody is watching. Stay as long as you need. Good night. If these mysteries kept you company tonight, a like helps the algorithm reach other people who might need exactly this at the end of their night. Drop a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is, where you are. Those are genuinely my favorite part of making these. Wherever you are, whatever time it is. Good night. Number. Section 13. The Mystery of Herbert, the oldest neighbor on Spooner Street. There is a character in Family Guy who appears more frequently than many of the show's recurring cast members, who has his own unmistakable musical cue that plays every time he appears on screen, and whose entire existence raises a set of questions that the show has collectively decided to treat as the setup to a very long-running joke rather than as anything requiring examination. His name is Herbert. He is very old. He has a dog named Jesse. He appears to have a romantic interest in Chris Griffin that the show has used as a recurring comedic premise for the entirety of the character's existence, which began in Season 2 and has continued through virtually every subsequent season. The mystery of Herbert is not what the show uses him for. The show is explicit about that, in the way that Family Guy is explicit about uncomfortable things by putting them in plain sight and daring the audience to react. The mystery of Herbert is where he comes from, what his history is, how he came to be living on the same street as the Griffins, and what his interior life consists of in the long stretches between his appearances in the narrative. He is voiced by Mike Henry, who has voiced the character since his introduction with a specific quality of frail, quavering earnestness that makes the character simultaneously pitiable and deeply uncomfortable. Herbert is old enough that his physical capabilities are visibly limited. He moves slowly, he uses a walker, his voice has the particular quality of great age. He lives alone, except for Jesse. He appears to have no family, no visitors, no social life beyond his proximity to the Griffin household and his periodic attempts to engage with Chris. He bakes pies, he has a swimming pool. He is, in many respects, a relatively ordinary elderly person living alone in a Rhode Island neighborhood, and the specific quality that makes him extraordinary is one that the show uses for comedy and that I am not going to dwell on, because the purpose here is to examine the mystery rather than the content. What is genuinely mysterious about Herbert is his past. The show has offered, in scattered references across multiple seasons, fragments of what Herbert's earlier life consisted of. There are flashbacks and references to his military service World War II era, which is consistent with his apparent age. There are references to a past that seems to have been more active, more engaged with the world. Herbert in his prime appears to have been a different person, or at least a person with more options available to him. And whatever sequence of events produced the version of Herbert who now lives alone on Spooner Street with his dog and his pies is a story the show has never told completely. The dog Jesse is himself a small mystery. He appears to be a very old dog, older than dogs typically get, and the relationship between Herbert and Jesse has a quality of long companionship, the specific warmth of a person and an animal who have been together long enough that the animal's presence is less comfort than it is simply part of the architecture of the person's life. When Jesse dies in one episode, Herbert's grief is among the show's more genuinely moving moments, the loss of the last living thing that has been with him across whatever the previous decades contained. The show's most interesting Herbert episode is arguably not one of the many comedic appearances, but a flashback sequence in which a much younger Herbert, capable and physically vigorous, appears in a World War II context. This younger Herbert is recognizably the same person but occupying a very different position in the world, a position with mobility and agency and a future that the current Herbert no longer has. The gap between young Herbert and old Herbert is not just biological. It is the gap between a life in motion and a life that has arrived at its end, and the show uses that gap for comedy in a way that occasionally tips into something more complex before pulling back to safer territory. Herbert's relationship with the Griffins, particularly with Peter, is one of the more interesting background elements of the show. Peter seems to genuinely not understand what Herbert's interest in Chris represents, or to understand it and choose not to engage with the understanding, which produces its own particular kind of comedy. The other adult characters appear to have varying levels of awareness. Joe Swanson, as a police officer, presumably has professional knowledge of the situation that should generate professional consequences, and yet it does not. The show has always maintained a distance between Herbert's behavior and any consequences that would be visited upon it by the civic institutions that theoretically exist to prevent it, and this distance is the show choosing comedy over consequence, in a way that is consistent with its general approach to uncomfortable subject matter. Herbert is lonely. This is the thing the show communicates most clearly and most consistently about him, underneath everything else. He is an old man who lives alone with a dog, on a street where a family he has become adjacent to has given him the only regular human contact he appears to have. His interest in Chris is the show's premise for including him, but the loneliness is what makes the character more than a one-note gag. Every scene where Herbert shuffles toward the Griffin house with a pie or a comment or an invitation is a scene of someone trying to connect with the world in the only way currently available to them, which is also the story of almost every old person who lives alone, just with the specific qualities that make it Family Guy. The question of who Herbert was before Spooner Street, what the arc of his life looked like, what choices and circumstances produced the specific old man shuffling toward a neighbor's door with a pie, is one the show has been content to leave unanswered since Season 2. He appeared. He became a recurring presence. His history is fragments and implications. His future is unclear in the way that the future of any very old character in a show that uses a floating timeline is unclear. He is not going to age to death on screen, but he is also not going to get younger, and the show will need to keep finding uses for him or retire him the way it retired Mayor West. He is there on Spooner Street. He is always there. And whatever the story is that produced him, it happened before the cameras arrived, in the long stretch of life that the show has never found time to tell. Number. Section 14. The Drunken Clam and the Social Architecture of Four Friends. The Drunken Clam is the bar at the center of the Griffin family's social universe. It is located in the Griffin family's town. It is owned for most of the show's run by a man named Horace, who eventually dies hit by a baseball, thrown by Jerome in the season 11 episode Save the Clam. And it is the physical location where Peter Griffin, Glenn Quagmire, Joe Swanson, and for the earlier seasons Cleveland Brown gather to drink, talk, and be the kind of friends that the show presents as ordinary male friendship in a working-class Rhode Island context. The mystery of the Drunken Clam is not really the bar itself, which is a fairly conventional neighborhood tavern with a maritime theme and a loyal local clientele. The mystery is what the friendship at its center actually represents, and how the show has changed it over time in ways that mirror the show's broader changes, but have been less frequently discussed than the character changes to Peter or Brian. In the early seasons, the friendship between Peter, Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland has a specific texture. They like each other. Not in the complicated, conditional, transactional way that the show's later seasons sometimes suggests, but in the straightforward way of people who have spent enough time together that their comfort with each other is simply a given. They help each other imperfectly. They give bad advice with good intentions. They show up when showing up is required. The friendship is not perfect. It is the friendship of imperfect people who have decided that being imperfect together is preferable to being alone, but it has genuine warmth beneath the surface. Comedy. Cleveland Brown's departure in Season 8, when he was given his own spin-off show, The Cleveland Show, changed the dynamic. The three-person version of the friend group that resulted Peter, Quagmire, Joe felt subtly different from the four-person version, not because Cleveland was the essential member, but because the absence of any single member changes the social arithmetic of a small group. The conversations that happened between the three were not the same as the conversations that happened between four, and some of what Cleveland represented in the group, a particular quality of steady, grounded presence, was not replaced. After the Cleveland show ended, and Cleveland returned to Family Guy, the group resumed its four-person configuration, but the years away had happened, and the show's general trajectory over those years had produced changes in how all of these characters related to each other that were not easily undone by simply reintroducing Cleveland to the bar. Joe Swanson's arc within the friendship is one of the show's less examined ongoing narratives. Introduced in Season 1 as a wheelchair-using police officer who commands the respect of the entire neighborhood, Peter is actually jealous of Joe's status. In his debut episode, Joe gradually becomes a character, defined more by his disability than by any other quality. The early Joe is capable, admired, and formidable in ways that his wheelchair does not diminish. The later Joe is more likely to be the subject of jokes about his disability than to be the cool, competent officer who introduced him. His marriage to Bonnie, which has been a source of ongoing storyline across the entire run of the show, has moved from loving relationship to strained relationship to near collapse to partial recovery, without ever arriving at any stable, settled place. The baby that Bonnie was pregnant with for what seemed like multiple seasons before finally giving birth is a detail so extended that it became its own background joke. Bonnie appeared to be pregnant for years of broadcast time. Before Susie was born, which the show's floating timeline makes possible even as it makes no biological sense. The Drunken Clam itself underwent a major change in Season 11 when Horace died, and the bar was briefly under threat of closure or transformation before being restored to something resembling its previous form. The continuity of the bar, as a physical space, the same booths, the same lighting, the same approximate configuration, is one of the show's more consistent physical settings, even as the characters who fill it change around it. It is the still point in a show that is otherwise in constant motion, the place where things return to, the location of the show's most reliable social rituals. Who owns it now? After Horace's death, the ownership of the Drunken Clam was not clearly established as a permanent arrangement in subsequent episodes. The bar continues to operate. The friends continue to meet there. The beer continues to be served. But the institutional questions around who holds the license, who is responsible for the building, who makes the decisions about what the bar does and does not do, these have been quietly ignored in the way that the show ignores practical questions that would complicate what is otherwise a reliable narrative location. The friendship endures. However, the individual characters have changed. However, Peter has become crueler. However, Quagmire's relationship with Brian has become a defining feud rather than a background texture. However, Joe's dignity has been periodically compromised in ways the early show would not have permitted the four of them still show up at the same bar on the same stools. The routine of it is more durable than any of the individual people performing it, which may be the show's most quietly honest observation about friendship, that the ritual of it outlasts many of the reasons you started showing up in the first place. Number. Section 15. Stewie's Time Machine, and the paradoxes nobody investigates. Stewie Griffin has a time machine. This is one of the most significant facts in the Family Guy universe, and it is treated with less gravity than it deserves by virtually everyone who encounters it, including the show itself. The machine allows travel to specific points in past time. Stewie has used it to return to the show's own pilot episode and observe events from the outside. He has used it to rescue Brian from a fatal car accident. He has traveled to the future, or allowed the future to travel to him in the form of older versions of himself and Brian, who appear periodically to comment on or alter present events. The machine is a fully functioning device for temporal navigation, and it has been sitting in a baby's bedroom in a 4-bedroom house in Rhode Island for the entire run of the show. The paradoxes generated by its use are numerous, and the show has never engaged with any of them seriously. When Stewie uses the machine to go back and save Brian from the car accident in Season 12's Christmas Guy, he creates a timeline in which Brian never died. But the episodes between Life of Brian and Christmas Guy, the episodes where the Griffin family grieved Brian and adopted Vinny, happened. They occurred. If Brian is alive, they did not happen in the way the audience experienced them. The timeline in which Brian died and Vinny arrived is now an unrealized possibility, a path that was being traveled and then wasn't. What happens to all the versions of reality generated by Stewie's interventions? They presumably continue to exist in branching parallel, which means there is a version of the Family Guy universe running right now in which Brian is still dead and Vinny is still a member of the Griffin household, and the Griffins in that timeline have no knowledge of the Christmas rescue. The time machine also means that Stewie has, in theory, the power to fix virtually any problem that has ever occurred in the show's history. He could go back and prevent the decline in Peter's character. He could ensure that Meg receives better treatment in her childhood. He could give Brian's novel a stronger ending. He could prevent the writer's strike that disrupted production. He has chosen to do none of these things, which is partly because the show's continuity requires them not to be fixed, and partly because Stewie's compassion has always been selective. He uses the machine for what matters to him emotionally, and he is not emotionally invested in Meg's well-being or Peter's character development. The older Stewie, who periodically appears from the future, is himself a paradox. If Stewie is going to live long enough to become an older version of himself, then the show's implicit resolution of Brian's age, question the suggestion that Brian will eventually die, as dogs do, becomes complicated by Stewie's continued existence. If Stewie is alive in whatever future the older Stewie represents, then Brian presumably is not, and the friendship at the center of the show's best episodes has ended in the way that all friendships with dogs eventually end. The show does not want to go there. The older Stewie appears and is used for jokes and then disappears back into the future from which he came, and the present Stewie continues being 1 year old in a show that has been running for more than 25 years, and the time machine sits in the corner of his bedroom, available whenever the plot needs it, and the paradoxes it generates accumulate quietly in the background of every episode that follows. There is a version of Family Guy that could use the time machine as a genuine narrative device, a show that treats the existence of working temporal technology as a fact with real implications for how the characters relate to their own futures and pasts. But that show would require commitments that Family Guy has never been interested in making. The time machine is a joke delivery system. The paradoxes are externalities. The machine sits there, patient and permanent, in the bedroom of a child who has been 1 year old since 1999, waiting for the next moment when the plot needs something changed. Stewie built it. Nobody asked him to build it. Nobody regulated it. Nobody in the Rhode Island government or the federal government or any international body has established a protocol for what to do when an infant has functional time travel technology. The machine is simply there, in a house on Spooner Street, alongside the weapons and the satellites and the various other devices Stewie has constructed for reasons that the adults in the house have collectively decided not to examine. This may be the show's deepest unresolved mystery, not the specific question of any one character's history or the specific contradiction of any one continuity error, but But the broader question of what it means that an infant in a normal suburban house in Rhode Island has built technology that could fundamentally alter the course of human history, and the response of the world to this has been essentially nothing. Peter watches television. Lois makes dinner. Brian writes sentences and deletes them. And in the corner of the baby's room, the time machine hums. Number. Section 16. The town's geography and the map that doesn't exist. The town where the Griffins live is a fictional place, but it is a fictional place that has specific physical properties: streets, buildings, neighborhoods, a harbor, an airport, a brewery, a high school, a bar, a courthouse, a mall that the show depicts with reasonable consistency when convenient and complete inconsistency when a different location is needed for the plot. The geography of the town is one of the show's most casually maintained mysteries, and exploring it reveals something about how the show understands its own setting. The address 31 Spooner Street is established early and maintained throughout. The Griffins' immediate neighbors are known. Quagmire lives at 29 Spooner Street, one door down. The Swansons are across the street. Cleveland Brown was across the street before departing for his own show. The immediate social geography of Spooner Street is relatively stable. These are the houses, these are the people, these relationships form the local core of the show's world. Beyond Spooner Street, the geography becomes more flexible. The Drunken Clam is near enough to walk to, but has appeared in locations that are not always geographically consistent with each other when the few times the show has shown characters walking between locations are mapped. The brewery where Peter works is in the town Pawtucket Patriot Ale, is produced locally, but its position relative to the residential neighborhoods has varied. The airport is near enough for the characters to use regularly, but far enough that travel to it feels like an event. The town is adjacent to Providence, Rhode Island, and is sometimes positioned as a suburb or neighboring community of Providence. It has a harbor, suggesting coastal access. The characters can drive to Boston in a reasonable time. The geography places the fictional community within a real geographic region, anchored by actual Rhode Island topography and proximity, while maintaining enough flexibility that the specific location within that region is never pinned down precisely enough to create contradictions with real Rhode Island geography. The show has created a fictional identity for the town that is distinct enough to feel like a real place to its long-term viewers. A place with specific institutions, specific local culture, specific recurring locations that have become as familiar as the characters themselves. The Drunken Clam is a real place in the sense that audiences have an emotional relationship with it. The brewery is a real place in that sense. The courthouse where the Kool-Aid Man repeatedly breaches the walls is a real place, complete with a judge who has developed a policy around the breach. The town's geography is both specific and impossible to fully map. It is large enough to contain everything the show has ever needed it, to contain hospitals, malls, airports, harbors, forests, suburbs, urban areas, rural areas, and small enough that all of its residents feel knowable, that the social world of the Griffins is the social world of the town, that everyone seems to know everyone else in the way that small towns produce that effect. Mount Quahog is visible in a picture behind the couch in the Griffin living room, its identity confirmed in a Season 18 episode. There is a mountain named after the town. This means the town has a geographic feature significant enough to be named after it, or the town was named after the mountain, which would be the more historically typical pattern, and the mountain is visible from the living room of a suburban house in a coastal community. Rhode Island's actual topography makes a mountain visible from a coastal community somewhat challenging to reconcile with real geography, which is fine, because the town is fictional and its geography exists to serve the story rather than to match the physical reality of the state that nominally contains it. The town goes on, in every direction, past the edge of every frame. There are streets not shown, buildings not depicted, lives the show has never found time to follow. The full scope of the place the Griffins live is always just slightly beyond the camera's reach, hinted at in establishing shots and background details and the casual mentions of locations the characters reference, but the audience never sees. It is a complete world suggested rather than shown, which is how all fictional worlds work, but which Family Guy has maintained with more success than the show's reputation for inconsistency might suggest. The map does not exist. The geography is implied. The town keeps going in the dark, past the edges of the episodes, doing whatever towns do when nobody is filming. Number. Final section. The questions that remain. We have spent several hours in the company of these mysteries, and none of them have resolved. because none of them can resolve, not because the answers do not exist somewhere, in some writer's room document or creator's original intention, but because the show has chosen not to provide them, and in choosing not to provide them has created something more durable than answers. It has created the questions themselves. The Kool-Aid Man is somewhere in this fictional Rhode Island town right now, waiting near a public building, listening for 3 consecutive sounds that will launch him through a wall. He will make his entrance. He will assess the room. He will back out slowly, in the sheepish way that has been his signature since the very first episode of the show. And then he will go home, to his house, to his girlfriend, to his couch, and the cigarette will burn down, and the next set of sounds will eventually find him. Ernie is healing from whatever Peter did to him most recently. His eye is open. His wife Nicole is somewhere in their house, probably having a conversation in her mind about the restaurant bill that could have been settled peacefully if 2 particular people were different than they are. His child is at the preschool that Stewie also attends, learning to finger paint or share or whatever skills are being emphasized that week, without knowing or perhaps knowing perfectly well what his father does when the enemy appears. Brian is writing a sentence and deleting it. He is somewhere between 7 and 10 years old. He is somewhere between 49 and 70 in human terms. He is driving his Prius or drinking his martini or standing in the kitchen trying to make a point that Stewie will deflect before he finishes making it. He is alive because Stewie went back in time and saved him. And the fact of that rescue lives in the structure of the show's timeline in ways that nobody in the show has acknowledged. Stewie is 1 year old. He has been 1 year old for more than 25 years. His time machine is in the corner of his room. His weapons are in the room behind the wall that nobody in his family has ever thought to wonder about. His friendship with Brian is the most consistent relationship in the show, more consistent than any marriage or any blood connection the series has produced, and the mystery of why Brian can hear him when nobody else reliably can is the mystery that sits at the center of that friendship. Mayor West is gone, genuinely, because the person who played him is gone, and the show's tribute to him, the renamed school, the sincere farewell, is one of the most human things this occasionally inhumane show has done. His cousin holds the office now, but the office feels emptier than it did, and the town is governed by a competence that Mayor West never brought and also never needed to bring, because the point of Mayor West was never competence. The house on Spooner Street belongs to someone. Carter Pewterschmidt is paying the mortgage, or Peter and Lois own it outright from a condom lawsuit settlement, or they have been renting it all along. One of these things is true, and the show has decided that all 3 can be true in sequence without any of them canceling the others out, which is either a creative choice or a continuity failure, and is probably both simultaneously. Stan Thompson is somewhere, unaware of or aware of a daughter he has never met, whose existence was confirmed by a talking dog in a passing remark in Season 3 and has never been revisited since. He is the negative space of a character, the shape of an absence, the answer to a question the show has never decided to ask. Death is watching television. His ankle has been fine for many seasons. He collects souls as they come, moves on to the next, maintains whatever domestic situation he maintains with his mother in whatever kind of home the embodiment of mortality keeps. He brings his dog when dogs die. The dog Reaper is somewhere in the organization chart, performing the same function for the canine population that the main death performs for humans. The drunken clam is open. The 4 friends, or 3, or 4 again, are on their usual stools. The beer is cold. The television above the bar is showing whatever the television shows in fictional Rhode Island bars on a Tuesday night. The conversation is about whatever it is about. It is a version of a conversation they have been having since Season 1, and it will continue for as long as the show continues, which based on current renewal deals is at least through Season 27 and the show's 30th anniversary. The mysteries remain, the questions persist, and somewhere in the dark, just before sleep arrives, these are the kinds of things that are worth thinking about, not because they resolve, but because sitting with unresolvable questions is its own kind of rest. The mind finds its way to the edge of the knowable and stops there, and that stopping is a kind of peace. The town keeps going. The lights stay on behind the windows on Spooner Street. The Kool-Aid Man waits. Ernie's eye opens. The time machine hums. Good night. Thank you for watching. If these questions kept you company tonight, a like means more people find their way here. Comment with your location and time. I read every single one. And subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. This has been Uncle Guy Lore. Sleep well. Number Section 17. The Mystery of Stewie's Accent. There is a question that has sat in the background of Family Guy since the very first episode, quiet and patient, waiting for someone to take it seriously enough to examine it. It is this. Why does Stewie Griffin speak with a British accent? Not a mild transatlantic inflection, not the vague mid-century American broadcast voice that certain old films gave their characters. A full, rounded, received pronunciation British accent, the kind associated with the English upper class, with private schools and country houses, and the sort of theatrical villainy that produces lines like blast and confound it, and long, elegant monologues delivered to henchmen who are too frightened to point out the obvious flaws in the plan being described to them. Stewie's accent is not a stylistic choice on the part of a character who has selected it deliberately, the way someone might. It is simply the accent that he has. It is the accent he was born with. Or rather, it is the accent that emerged when he began speaking, which happened earlier than most babies speak and at a vocabulary level that no infant has any business possessing. He was born in Quahog, Rhode Island, to an American mother and an American father. He lives in Rhode Island. He has never been to England in any extended way that the show has depicted. The people around him, his parents, his siblings, his neighbors speak in the flat American tones of the Northeast. The Rhode Island accent, when it appears at all in the show, is a very different sound from what Stewie produces. Peter occasionally produces sounds that gesture toward the region's distinctive phonology. Stewie produces received pronunciation. The show has almost never addressed this directly. There are a small number of moments across the show's run where the accent is referenced or where another character notices it, but these moments are jokes about the absurdity rather than explanations of it. The audience is expected to accept the accent as part of the character without wondering how it got there, in the same way the audience accepts that Stewie can build a time machine and that Brian can drive a car. These are simply facts about these people. But if you choose to take the question seriously, as we are doing here, the possibilities are interesting and none of them resolve cleanly. One possibility. The accent is an expression of the same remarkable intelligence that allows Stewie to construct weapons and speak in complete sentences at 1 year old. He is not like other babies. Whatever is happening in Stewie's brain, whatever developmental abnormality or supernatural quality, produced his intelligence, and his ambitions also produced his accent. He absorbed language differently from other infants, from a source other than the people immediately around him, and what came out was a voice shaped by something other than the Rhode Island environment that shaped everyone else. What source? Television is the obvious candidate. Stewie watches a great deal of television. The Griffin household has televisions in multiple rooms and they run nearly constantly. If Stewie absorbed his speaking patterns from British programming, the BBC, British documentaries, British dramas, he might have developed the accent, the way an adult language learner sometimes develops the accent of the specific teachers or recordings they used to learn, rather than a native version of the language. He learned to speak from British sources, and speaks as if British, even though he is not. This is speculative, but it is the kind of speculation the show invites by never providing a better explanation. Another possibility is one that the show's multiverse episodes make more plausible. Stewie is not entirely native to this version of the Griffin family. He is a 1-year-old with time travel technology and demonstrated awareness of parallel realities. In at least one episode, the show depicts a version of Stewie who is entirely without his characteristic qualities. A genuinely ordinary baby, non-verbal, without schemes or weapons or accent, who would simply be what he looks like on the surface. This suggests that the Stewie who lives on Spooner Street is a specific version of a character who could have been something else, which opens the door to asking whether this Stewie originated in this reality or arrived here from somewhere else and has simply been here long enough that nobody remembers a time before him. This is also speculative. But the multiverse is canon in this show, and canon possibilities are worth following. The most mundane explanation that Seth MacFarlane wanted Stewie to have a British accent because it suited the character's pompous villainy, and that the creative choice was made without any in-universe justification, because in-universe justification was not the point, is almost certainly the true explanation. But the true explanation is not the interesting one. The interesting one is what the accent implies about who Stewie is and where he came from, and what is happening inside his remarkable, terrifying 1-year-old mind. He speaks in the voice of a British aristocrat. He schemes with the ambition of a movie villain. He loves Brian and he loves his teddy bear Rupert, and he has never killed his mother despite many attempts, which means that either the mother is more resilient than expected or the love is stronger than the plans, and both of those possibilities say something about a baby whose accent remains unexplained and whose nature remains one of the more interesting unsolved questions in animated television. Section 18. The question of Chris Griffin. Chris Griffin is easy to overlook. He is the middle child of the Griffin family in terms of actual screen time and dramatic importance, sandwiched between the more narratively active Meg and the cosmically strange Stewie, voicing a personality that is defined primarily by gentle awkwardness and a kind of cheerful incomprehension that makes him sympathetic without generating the same emotional investment that the show's other characters produce. He is the kid who seems fine. He is the kid nobody is particularly worried about. He is the kid who, in most episodes, either has a small subplot of his own or exists as background presence in someone else's storyline, and his continued existence in both cases is accepted without examination. But Chris Griffin, looked at closely, is genuinely mysterious in ways that the show has occasionally gestured toward and then retreated from. He draws. This is established in the early seasons and maintained sporadically throughout the show's run. Chris has a talent for visual art, a capacity for representation and expression through drawing that the rest of his family does not share. In an early episode, a talent agent sees his work and becomes excited about it. The talent is real. The show treats it as real. And then the show mostly forgets about it, the way it forgets about many of the specific qualities it establishes in characters before the character solidifies into their later, more reduced form. Who is Chris's artistic talent from? Not Peter, who has no documented relationship with visual art. Not Lois, whose talents run toward piano and the domestic management of chaos. Not Brian, whose creative ambitions are literary. The Griffin family does not produce visual artists. And yet Chris does. The talent appeared from somewhere, from some recombination of hereditary possibilities or some influence that the show has never traced, and it remains there in his character, underused, waiting for an episode that will give it the attention it was given when the show was young enough to be interested in developing its younger characters as full people. Chris also has a relationship with an entity that lives in his closet. This is not a metaphor. In the early seasons, there is an entity in Chris's closet referred to sometimes as the evil monkey, who points at Chris in a threatening manner whenever the closet is opened. This entity has a backstory, which the show eventually reveals. The monkey is there because of personal circumstances involving his wife and the grief that followed, circumstances that make him pitiable once understood. The revelation humanizes the monkey. It provides context. It retroactively changes what the pointing meant or might have meant, given the emotional state of the one pointing. Chris and the evil monkey eventually form something like a relationship, a resolution of the long-running tension of the closet. The monkey leaves. The closet becomes just a closet. The narrative that was conducted between a boy and an entity living in his bedroom, conducted mostly in silence and through the single gesture of pointing, concludes. This is one of the stranger ongoing character relationships in the show, and it belongs to Chris, not to Peter, whose storylines dominate, not to Stewie, whose genius generates its own narrative engine, but to the quiet, drawing, awkwardly cheerful middle child whose closet contained something nobody else in the family seemed properly concerned about. Chris is also, the show implies, not particularly intelligent, positioned as following Peter's intellectual limitations more closely than Lois's more capable mind. But Chris's lack of conventional intelligence coexists with his artistic gift in a way that the show has never found time to explore. The relationship between creative capacity and academic performance, the specific quality of a mind that cannot produce the answers on a test, but can produce an image that makes a talent agent reach for their phone. This is a genuinely interesting territory that a show interested in Chris as a full character could inhabit. The show has not been particularly interested in Chris as a full character for most of its run. He is there. He draws, sometimes. He is awkward, consistently. He is kind, in the general way of people who have not yet developed the capacity for strategic unkindness. He grows up across the show's run without aging, which is the condition all the children in the show share, and the version of Chris who exists in Season 23 is in no observable way different from the version who existed in Season 3, except that the closet no longer contains an evil monkey, and the talent for drawing is mentioned less frequently. Whatever Chris Griffin might have become, in a version of the show more interested in its quieter members, remains a mystery. He is the character most fully trapped inside the show's indifference to its own potential. He is fine. The show has decided he is fine. And that decision is itself the most interesting thing about him. Number, Section 19. The multiple deaths of Brian Griffin. Brian Griffin has died more than once. This is a fact about a character whose mortality is occasionally treated as a real narrative event and more often treated as a temporary condition from which recovery is possible, whether through time travel, narrative reset, or the show's general elasticity regarding consequences. The death in Season 12, the one that generated national headlines, that trended on social media, that caused genuine distress among viewers who had spent a decade with the character, was undone within 2 episodes by Stewie's use of the time machine. This is the death most people mean when they talk about Brian's death. It was presented as permanent. It was not permanent. The show chose the emotional impact of the death, and then chose not to pay the price of that impact by maintaining it. But Brian has also died in other contexts, in alternate timelines, in dream sequences, in the show's frequent excursions into parallel realities where different choices produce different endings. There is a version of Brian who stayed dead. There is a version of Brian who survived the car accident because Stewie arrived in time, which is the version we are watching. These 2 versions coexist somewhere in the structure of the show's multiverse, and the one that survived is the one we follow because Stewie loves him enough to go back. The question of what Brian's death meant, the Season 12 version, has been debated since it happened. The cynical reading is that it was a ratings stunt, a manipulation of audience emotion for the purpose of generating attention and viewership in the weeks surrounding the death and resurrection. The evidence for this reading is fairly strong. The death was covered extensively in entertainment media, it drove significant viewership for the episodes involved, and the resurrection came so quickly that the narrative consequences were minimal. The show got the benefit of Brian's death without absorbing the cost of it. The more generous reading is that the storyline was a genuine exploration of grief, that the episodes following Brian's death, in which the Griffin family mourns and adapts and attempts to fill the absence with Vinny, are actually doing something real with the subject of losing a pet and a companion, and that the resurrection, while narratively convenient, also honors the truth that love strong enough to reach across time is the kind of love worth writing about. Both readings can be true simultaneously. The show manipulated its audience emotionally and also produced genuine emotion. These are not mutually exclusive outcomes. The manipulation is real, and so is the grief that the manipulation generated, because the audience's feelings are real, even when the stimuli producing them are calculated. People cried about a cartoon dog. That is a remarkable thing. The fact that the dog came back does not undo the crying or the reality of what the crying represented. A genuine connection to a character that had been built across more than a decade of episodes. Brian's other deaths, the ones in alternate timelines, the ones in hypotheticals, are more philosophically interesting because they are not undone by Stewie's intervention. They simply exist as possibilities that were realized in some configuration of the show's multiverse and not in the primary one. Somewhere in the branching structure of Family Guy's reality, Brian did not come back. The Griffins kept Vinny. The show continued without the white dog in the corner of the living room. That version exists, and the characters in it do not know about this version, and the characters in this version do not know about that one. Brian is alive. He is drinking a martini, or walking through a door, or trying to explain something to Peter that Peter is not going to understand. He is alive because a baby built a time machine and used it out of love, which is, if you choose to see it that way, among the most genuinely moving facts about this particular animated universe. The deaths that almost happened, the one that did happen and then unhappened, the versions of Brian that ended in timelines running parallel to this one. These are the multiple deaths of Brian Griffin, and none of them resolved cleanly, and all of them mean something about the show's relationship with loss and how much it is and is not willing to commit to it. Number Section 20? The Pawtucket Patriot Ale situation? Peter Griffin works at a brewery. This is among the most stable facts about Peter's adult life, more stable in certain respects than his marriage, his friendships, or his relationship with his children, all of which have been periodically stressed or complicated in ways that Peter's employment has not. He works at the Pawtucket Patriot Ale Brewery. He has worked there for most of the show's run. The brewery produces a specific regional beer. The beer is part of the social infrastructure of the town. It is what people drink at the Drunken Clam. It is what Peter and his friends consume in quantity during their evenings together. It is a local product, with local loyalty and a local workforce. But the specific nature of Peter's employment at the brewery has always been somewhat unclear. What does he do there exactly? The show has given various answers across its run, none of them especially consistent. In some episodes, Peter appears to be a line worker, someone involved in the physical production process, the moving of product, the operation of machinery. In other episodes, he has a different role, something more administrative or supervisory, which sits uncomfortably with Peter's documented intellectual limitations. In still other episodes, Peter's role at the brewery seems to exist primarily to give him access to beer and to the building itself. As when the brewery's specific events or products become plot relevant, and Peter's employment is the mechanism by which the plot gains access to them. The owner of the brewery is Pawtucket Pat, a recurring character who serves as Peter's employer and who has appeared across the show's run in various states of relationship with Peter, sometimes antagonistic, sometimes paternal, sometimes simply a name attached to a business that exists to contextualize Peter's working life. Pat's role in the brewery's operations is similarly variable. He is the owner in the way that the show needs an owner, present when the plot needs him, and absent when his presence would complicate what is otherwise a simpler story. Peter's salary at the brewery has been referenced in various ways across the show but has never been established firmly enough to make the Griffin family's financial situation fully coherent. He makes enough to own or appear to own a 4-bedroom house in Rhode Island. He makes enough to drink extensively at a bar most evenings. He makes enough to fund the periodic disasters that his schemes produce, which require various forms of property repair and medical treatment and legal settlement that should, in aggregate, constitute an enormous financial drain. The pre-brewery job Peter worked at the happy-go-lucky toy factory before it shut down and he transitioned to the brewery is occasionally referenced. The transition between employers was not a minor event in Peter's life. It was the kind of workplace disruption that affects families, particularly families already operating close to their financial limits. But the show handled the transition with its characteristic flexibility, moving Peter to a new employer without spending a great deal of time on the intermediate period or the specific circumstances of the move. The Pawtucket Patriot Ale itself as a product has been marketed within the show's universe in ways that suggest a fairly substantial regional brand. There are advertisements, there are promotional events, there is enough consumer recognition that the beer appears at bars and social gatherings without requiring explanation. The brewery is a real business producing a real product in the world of the show. Peter is employed by that business. And yet the exact nature of his contribution to its operations remains, after more than 20 years, genuinely unclear. This may be intentional. Peter's job is background. It is the fact that explains why he is not home during the day, that provides occasional plot hooks when the brewery or its owner are needed for story purposes, that gives him a specific kind of working-class identity that shapes how he is understood by the audience. The specific details of his job duties are less important to the show than the general category of his employment, and the show has always been willing to trade specificity for flexibility when specificity would create constraints. He goes to work. He comes home. Sometimes work follows him home, in the form of a problem or a character or a specific beer-related circumstance. The brewery hums on the edge of the show's universe, producing its product, paying its workers, including one worker whose contributions are real enough to maintain his employment for more than 20 years and unclear enough to have never been precisely defined. Section 21. Lois Griffin's Hidden Life. Lois Griffin is, in the framing of the show, the reasonable one. She is the member of the Griffin family who functions as the audience's proxy for sanity, the person whose eye rolls and exasperated sighs communicate that yes, whatever Peter is doing is as ridiculous as it appears, and yes, the family is aware of this, and no, there is apparently nothing to be done about it. She is the competent center of a family that would otherwise collapse entirely, the practical intelligence that keeps the household functioning despite the particular qualities of everyone else in it. She is also, in the early seasons especially, a woman with her own history and her own interior life that the show has periodically explored and then retreated from in ways that have left her less fully realized than she was when the show was younger, and more interested in her as a full person. Lois's family is the Pewterschmidt family old money, significant wealth, a history that extends back through generations of privilege. Her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, is among the show's most reliable recurring characters. a man whose wealth has insulated him from normal human consequences to the point where he experiences the world entirely through the lens of his own comfort and entitlement, and whose relationship with Peter has been a source of ongoing comedy derived from Carter's barely concealed contempt for the man his daughter chose to marry. What is mysterious about Lois's history is how she got from her family of origin to the house on Spooner Street. This is not a simple journey. She grew up with access to wealth, to social status, to the specific kind of ease that significant inherited money provides. She attended a good school. She could have married, as her parents presumably hoped, someone from her own class, someone whose social and financial situation would have maintained the Pewterschmidt family's standing and expectations. She did not do this. She married Peter Griffin. The story of how Lois and Peter met and chose each other has been told in various flashback episodes across the show's run, and the various versions of it are not entirely consistent. What they share is the basic fact of an attraction that overcame what appeared to be significant social obstacles, that Lois saw something in Peter, or felt something with Peter, that was not available from the more socially appropriate options her background produced, and she made the choice to pursue that, against her parents' wishes and against the logic of her class background. What did she see? This is the question that the show's later seasons have made harder to answer, because the Peter of the later seasons is not obviously the object of anyone's genuine affection. But the early seasons give some sense of it, a Peter who was warm, who was enthusiastic, who was loyal in the specific way of someone who did not have a great many options, and therefore invested completely in the ones he had. Early Peter loved Lois, clearly, consistently, with a kind of inarticulate sincerity that made the love credible even when the behavior that surrounded it was ridiculous. Lois has depths that the show has excavated and then filled back in. Her rebellious past has been referenced, a younger Lois who was not always the responsible center of a family, who had her own period of wildness and exploration. Her piano playing is a genuine talent, practiced and skilled, and represents a version of Lois who had artistic ambitions that the domestic life of 31 Spooner Street has mostly absorbed. She has had her own episodes of moral complexity moments where the responsible Lois is revealed to contain a less responsible Lois who has simply been waiting for permission to emerge. She is a woman who made a choice that her family disapproved of and has lived with that choice across the entire run of the show. The fact that the choice has produced a household full of chaos and a husband who has gotten worse rather than better as the seasons progressed is not something the show dwells on, because the show's premise requires the marriage to continue and therefore the marriage continues. But the woman who exists inside the marriage, the woman who plays piano and has a complicated relationship with her parents and once made a choice that defined the rest of her life, is more interesting than the show has usually given her credit for being. Her relationship with Carter Pewterschmidt is one of the show's more reliably interesting ongoing dynamics. Carter is awful in ways the show treats as funny, and Lois's relationship with him contains genuine complexity, the love and resentment of a daughter who knows exactly who her parent is, and has decided that knowing does not change the fundamental fact of the relationship. She stands between Carter and Peter in ways that neither man fully appreciates, managing both of them, refusing to let either one collapse into his worst qualities without at least attempting resistance. She is still there, at 31 Spooner Street, in the kitchen or the living room, or wherever the scene requires her to be. The piano is in the living room. The competence is in every room. The interior life, the full version of Lois Pewterschmidt Griffin, who was once a young woman with her own desires and choices and ambitions, and a family that expected something specific of her, is somewhere in the house, waiting for an episode that will give it adequate time. The show has not found that episode yet. It may still. Number. Section 22. The show's relationship with its own history. Family Guy has been on the air since 1999. It premiered the night after Super Bowl 33. It was canceled. It came back. It was nearly canceled again. It came back again. It has now been running, in various configurations and with various levels of creative ambition, for more than a quarter century, which places it in a category of very few television programs, shows that have lasted long enough to become institutions rather than simply entertainments. An institution has a complicated relationship with its own history. It contains within its present form every previous version of itself. The show that airs on Wednesday nights in 2026 is the same show that premiered on a Sunday in 1999 and is also completely different from it. The characters are the same characters, and they are not the same characters. The setting is the same setting, and it has changed in dozens of ways. The voice cast has stayed remarkably consistent: Seth MacFarlane, Alex Borstein, Seth Green, Mila Kunis, while the writing room around them has cycled through many generations of writers, each generation leaving its own mark on what the show is and who the characters are. The show's relationship with its own history is a mystery because the show cannot decide what to do with it. On one hand, the history is there; it can be referenced, mined for callbacks, used to demonstrate that the show has been around long enough to have lore, to have specific episodes that function as cultural touchstones, to have a relationship with its audience that extends back far enough that some viewers have been watching since they were children and are now watching as adults. The history is a resource. On the other hand, the history is also a constraint. The show's early seasons established character dynamics, emotional tones, and narrative standards that the later seasons have not consistently maintained. Every callback to the early seasons implicitly compares what the show was to what it is, and that comparison is not always flattering. The history is the thing that critics cite when they say the show has declined. It is the standard against which the present is measured and found wanting. The show's response to this tension has been to alternate between two modes: episodes that engage genuinely with the show's history, that call back to earlier moments and earlier character dynamics and use the weight of accumulated time to produce something emotionally resonant, and episodes that essentially ignore the history, treating each installment as a fresh start in which the characters are whoever is useful for this particular story and the continuity is whatever is convenient. Both modes can produce good television. Some of the show's best later episodes are the ones that dig into its own archive, that use what the audience knows and has felt about these characters to produce moments that would not land without that accumulated history. The death of Brian generates emotion partly because of the specific death and mostly because of the 12 seasons that preceded it, the years of episodes that built the character into someone whose loss meant something. The episode where Stewie and Brian get locked in a bank vault and have a real conversation works because the audience has been watching these two characters interact for long enough that the conversation feels like something too real. People are having. The history is the show's greatest asset and its most complicated burden. It is both the proof that Family Guy was once something remarkable and the measure against which everything it does now is evaluated. The show carries it with variable grace, sometimes leaning into it with genuine feeling, sometimes deflecting it with self-referential jokes that acknowledge the history without actually engaging with it, sometimes ignoring it entirely in favor of whatever the episode needs to be this week. This relationship with its own past is unique to very long-running shows. Most programs end before they have to negotiate with their own history at this level. Family Guy has been running long enough that it has become its own context, the thing you need to know before you can fully understand anything else about it. Every new episode exists in the shadow of more than 500 episodes that preceded it. Every character choice is informed by the person that character has been for more than 25 years. How do you make a show that is also its own archive? How do you keep the characters fresh across a timeline longer than many of the people watching them have been alive? These are not questions with easy answers, and Family Guy has not always found the hard ones. But the attempt continues, the show runs, the history accumulates. And somewhere in the gap between what the show was and what it is, the mystery of how a program survives its own longevity continues, unresolved and ongoing. Number, Section 23, The Neighbors We Never See. Spooner Street, the Griffin Street, has a handful of established residents whose homes and lives we know because the show has made them central to its social world. But Spooner Street is a full street. There are houses on it beyond the Griffin house, beyond Quagmire's house, beyond the Swanson's house, and those houses contain people the camera has never found time to follow. Cleveland's house was one of those houses, until Cleveland was given his own show and the house briefly became occupied by other characters, and then became, in subsequent seasons, simply a house on the street with reduced narrative relevance. The physical house remained, the space remained. But the specific weight it carried in the neighborhood's social architecture changed when Cleveland left. Bonnie Swanson's interior life is one of the street's ongoing quiet mysteries. She is Joe's wife. She has been pregnant for what seemed like an impossibly long time by any realistic measure, and then she was not, and Susie arrived. She has been depicted as restless in her marriage, aware of what she gave up or did not pursue in order to be in the house across from the Griffins, aware in ways that Joe may or may not be aware of her awareness. The show has explored her discontent in specific episodes and then returned her to the role of neighbor wife in the episodes that follow. She is a woman with a life that the show periodically opens and then closes. The neighbors we never see are the ones who live in the houses between these established locations. There are children walking to school in the background of establishing shots who attend James Woods Regional High School alongside Meg and Chris, and those children have parents who live somewhere on these streets, and those parents have interior lives and histories and complications that are not part of the show's story, but are implied by the existence of the street as a real community rather than a set. The show's world has always operated on two levels. The focused level of the families we follow, where every room is known and every relationship has been mapped, and the implied level of the broader community, where the rest of the town goes about its business in the gaps between the scenes we watch. The town is full of people. We see very few of them. The ones we do see are known. The ones we do not are the mystery of the street that extends beyond the camera's frame. What is in the house 2 doors past Quagmire? What is the story of the person who waves to Peter as he backs out of his driveway and whose name Peter may not know despite more than 20 years of shared street? These people are there. The establishing shots show their houses. Their lights go on at night. Their cars are in their driveways. The town is more populated than the show can possibly depict, and most of what happens in it happens in the dark, outside the episodes, in the spaces between the frames. Spooner Street goes in both directions from number 31. We have followed it in a few directions. The rest of it remains. Number section 24. What the show loves, even now. After everything that has been said about the mysteries that pile up in this show, about the questions that accumulate and the consistencies that drift, and the characters that change in ways both chosen and unchosen, there is something worth pausing on before this particular journey ends. Family Guy loves certain things consistently, across all of its seasons, through all of its changes. The love is visible in the episodes where it is most present, and its absence is visible in the episodes where it is most absent, and the difference between those two kinds of episodes is the difference between the show at its best and the show at its worst. It loves the friendship between Brian and Stewie. Whatever else has changed about these two characters, however, Brian has become more flawed than sympathetic in certain stretches of the show's run. However, Stewie has traded the specific edge of his original concept for a broader emotional palette. The friendship between them remains. It is the show's most consistent relationship, the one that has been treated with the most care across the most seasons. The episodes that put these two characters in a room together and let them talk really talk, in the way that the Bank Vault episode permitted, in the way that the best road trip episodes have permitted, are routinely among the show's best work in any given season. The writers know this. The audience knows this. The show keeps coming back to it because it is the place where the show still recognizes what it is. It loves the specific quality of Rhode Island, that it has constructed the imaginary town that sits in a real state and has accumulated 25 years of invented geography and history and culture. The town is its own thing now, distinct enough from the real places that nominally surround it that it functions as its own complete world. The show loves that world in the way that the people who made it love the version of New England that it represents, slightly heightened, lightly satirical, fond of its own absurdities. It loves the recurring characters who exist outside the main cast, the Kool-Aid Man and Mayor West and Herbert and Death, and all the others whose appearances are reliable pleasures because their presence means the show is about to do something that only this show would do. These characters are the show's own private language, references that only make sense if you have spent time in this universe, and the people who have spent that time feel their appearance as a small homecoming. It loves, at its core, the family. Not the version of the family that treats Meg as a target or that has made Peter into something hard to root for. The version underneath that, the version that the early seasons established and that the better later episodes remember of a genuinely flawed family who love each other in the particular inarticulate way of people who would not choose each other from a lineup but have built a life together and are, in their way, committed to it. Peter loves Lois. The show has never fully given that up, even when Peter's behavior makes it nearly impossible to believe. The love is there, underneath the bad choices and the worst jokes, waiting for the episodes that choose to bring it to the surface. These are the things the show has loved consistently. They are visible in the data of which episodes are most remembered, most rewatched, most frequently cited by people who were once devoted viewers and have become more occasional ones. They are the reasons people keep coming back to something that they also freely criticize. The love is mixed with the frustration in the specific proportion that characterizes long relationships with imperfect things. The show is imperfect. It has always been imperfect. The difference is that in its early years, the imperfection was surrounded by enough genuine quality that it was easy to overlook, and in its later years the proportion has shifted. But the quality is still there, scattered across the seasons, in episodes and moments and exchanges between two characters in a room who remember how to talk to each other. That is the last mystery, maybe. How a show that contains so much genuine love for its characters, for its world, for the specific kind of comedy it pioneered, also contains so much carelessness about those same things. How the same writing room produced the episodes that made people feel something real, and the episodes that made those same people change the channel. How the potential and the failure coexist, season after season, in the same half-hour format, on the same fictional street, in the house where the lights are always on. The lights are always on at 31 Spooner Street. That is the final image. Whatever else is true about this show, whatever questions remain unanswered, and whatever consistencies have been broken, and whatever characters have changed in ways both deliberate and inadvertent, the lights at that house are always on. Someone is always home. The show has not ended. The family persists. And in the dark of wherever you are watching from, with sleep coming in at the edges of your awareness, that persistence is its own kind of answer to questions the show has never bothered to ask. The house is there, the family is in it, the questions accumulate in the rooms, and the lights stay on, warm against the Rhode Island night, for as long as the show decides they will. Good night, sleep well. The mysteries will still be there in the morning. If these questions kept you company tonight, a like means more people find their way here. Subscribe if you want to be here the next time we go somewhere like this. Tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is. I love knowing who is out there in the dark. This has been Uncle Guy Lore. Number, extended meditation, revisiting the chicken fight with fresh eyes. We should return to Ernie the giant chicken. Not because we have not spent time with him already, but because the chicken fight as a recurring narrative device rewards repeated examination. Each revisit reveals something that was not visible the first time, or that was visible but not fully understood, or that was understood but not felt. The fights are long. This is the first thing you notice when you go back and time them. The fights in the early seasons run for several minutes extended. Elaborate sequences of violence that travel through multiple locations, that escalate through stages, that produce an amount of physical damage in their environments that would require weeks of repair in the actual world. Cars are destroyed. Walls are demolished. At least once, the fight moved through a building under construction and reduced significant sections of it to rubble. The city around the fight absorbs damage that the city apparently absorbs quietly, without legal consequence, without the kind of civic response that a prolonged and very loud fight between a man and a giant chicken would actually generate in a real place. The fights in the later seasons run even longer. The show discovered that audiences responded to the chicken fight segments with enthusiasm. They became something fans anticipated and discussed and clipped for sharing, and the response to enthusiasm in a show that has been running for a very long time is often to give more. The fights got longer. They got more elaborate. They traveled to more locations, incorporated more environmental elements, spent more time on the visual creativity of the destruction being depicted. Each new fight needed to be larger than the last because the audience expected escalation and the show delivered escalation. But the escalation created a problem that is interesting when examined. The fights lost their surprise. The original chicken fight worked partly because it was unexpected, because the show had not previously established a giant chicken nemesis for Peter, because the extended violence felt like a departure from the show's normal register that was both shocking and comic. By the time you reach the fourth or fifth major chicken fight, the audience knows exactly what is coming the moment Ernie appears. The surprise is gone. What replaces it has to be something other than surprise, has to be spectacle or craft, or the specific pleasure of watching something that is now a tradition being observed. The tradition is observed, the fights continue, and the question of what Ernie is doing in the time between them living his life, working his job, going home to Nicole, picking up their child from school remains as unanswered as it was the first time we asked it. There is a theory among longtime fans that Ernie is aware of the cyclic nature of the conflict, that he, like the audience, knows that the fight will happen again, that it always happens again, that the coupon dispute from Season 2 set something in motion that neither party is capable of ending, and that he has simply incorporated this reality into his life, the way people incorporate things that are difficult and recurring and not amenable to resolution. The fight happens. He heals. He goes back to his life. He waits. The wait may be the longest part of what it is to be Ernie. Whether the fight is his fault is a question the show has never settled. The original coupon, the one that started it all, is presented as having been expired. Peter's position is that an expired coupon was given to him as a valid one, which constitutes a form of fraud or, at minimum, careless business practice. Ernie's position, to the extent the show has depicted it, is that the situation has escalated far beyond any reasonable response to the coupon's validity, and that Peter's aggression has been disproportionate to the original offense. Both positions have merit. This is the show's most honest acknowledgement of the arbitrary nature of conflict, that two people can each have a reasonable position and still end up destroying half a city's worth of infrastructure across multiple decades of occasional but extremely intense violence. The coupon was the reason. The reason has long since been swallowed by the conflict itself. They fight now because they fight. The origin is academic. Ernie is somewhere in Rhode Island right now, between fights. His eye is fine, his suit is pressed. The restaurant charges have been settled. He will appear again when the show needs him to appear, and when he does, the fight will happen and the city will absorb the damage, and both of them will survive, because neither of them is permitted to not survive. And in the gap between this fight and the next one, Ernie lives his life, a life the show has never found time to follow, a life that exists entirely in the space between the episodes that feature him. That life is the mystery, not the fight. The fight we know, the life we don't. Number, extended meditation. What Death thinks about during quiet moments. We discussed Death earlier, the Grim Reaper of the Family Guy universe. The figure who appeared in the Season 1 episode Death is a bitch with a sprained ankle and an inconvenient need for a temporary replacement. We established that he has a mother, that he has preferences and discomforts, that he exists as a person rather than simply a force. But there is more to say about what Death's interiority might look like, if we take seriously the idea that a character constructed with these qualities is a character worth taking seriously. Death has witnessed everything. Every death that has occurred in the history of the universe in this universe, the Family Guy universe specifically, but also by implication in the broader structure of existence that the show's cosmology implies Death has been present for. He was there at the beginning of life on this planet, whenever that beginning occurred. He was there at the end of every dinosaur, at the end of every human who has ever died, at the end of every animal and plant and organism that has concluded its existence since existence began. He has watched more endings than any other entity in the universe, and he will watch more endings still, presumably until the universe itself ends and there is nothing left to collect. What does this do to a person? Even a supernatural person? Even an entity that is not a person in the biological sense, but is clearly a person in the experiential sense, given that the show gives him preferences and a mother and a fondness for television? The answer the show implies, through the specific way it depicts death, is that it produces a kind of weary mundanity. Death is not anguished. He is not overwhelmed. He is tired in the way of someone who has been doing a job for a very long time and has found ways to make the job manageable, to abstract it, to professionalize it, to maintain a degree of distance between the work and the worker that allows the work to continue. He shows up. He collects. He moves on. He goes home to his mother. He watches television. He rests. The question of whether Death feels grief is interesting. He collects souls. Is the collection a transition, a relocation of something that continues in another form, or is it an ending? The show has never committed to a cosmology that would answer this. If Death is a transition, Death's job is essentially transportation. If Death is an ending, Death's job is the hardest job in existence. The show uses Death for comedy, which requires a certain lightness around the subject, which suggests that in this universe, Death has a quality of transition rather than absolute finality, that what Death collects goes somewhere, which is why he is a collector rather than simply an erasure. His relationship with the Griffin family is one of the show's quieter, ongoing threads. He has appeared multiple times. He has had enough interactions with Peter specifically that there is a familiarity between them. Not friendship exactly, but the specific familiarity of two people who keep encountering each other in the same context and have developed a tolerance for each other that is more than mere acknowledgement. Death knows Peter. He knows his household. He knows where to find them when the work brings him there. What does Death think about during the quiet moments between the work? The show has never answered this, but the question is worth holding. He has seen more of existence than anyone else in it. He has the longest perspective on anything that could be described as a perspective. He has watched civilizations build and collapse. He has collected the last member of every extinct species. He knows something about time and loss and change that no other character in the show's universe could possibly know. And he goes home and watches television. Which might be the most honest thing the show has ever said about how beings supernatural or otherwise cope with what they know. Number, extended meditation. The Griffin children and what they were supposed to become. The Griffin children, Meg, Chris, and Stewie, are three very different kinds of people who share a last name and a house. They have grown up together, to the extent that growing up is possible in a show that does not allow aging across the entire run of the series. They have been in the same rooms, eating the same meals, attending schools in the same fictional Rhode Island town for more than 25 years of broadcast time. They are strangers to each other, largely. This is one of the show's sadder background facts. The Griffin children do not have the kind of sibling relationships that produce shared history, mutual support, the specific warmth of people who have been through things together and emerged with an understanding that is different from any other kind. They have been through things together, the things that happen to a family, the ordinary and extraordinary events that the show generates at roughly one per episode. But these shared experiences have not produced the closeness that proximity usually generates. Meg and Chris's relationship is the most ordinary of the possible sibling pairs. They are the two who attend the same school, who exist in the same social world, who have the most overlap in their daily environments. And yet the show has generated relatively little from their relationship, relatively few episodes that focus specifically on the two of them, on what they mean to each other, on whether the older sister has any genuine role in the younger brother's life or vice versa. They exist in parallel more than in connection. Meg and Stewie's relationship is more interesting precisely because of its strangeness. Stewie is 1 year old, and has been 1 year old since before Meg was the age she currently appears to be. He cannot actually be her younger sibling in any developmental sense. And yet the family structure positions him as the youngest, the baby, the one who gets carried while the others walk. Meg's relationship with Stewie has never been explored with the seriousness that the strangeness of it might invite a teenage girl and a 1 year old who is significantly more intelligent and capable than she is, living in the same household, nominally siblings, having essentially no meaningful relationship with each other. Chris and Stewie's relationship has slightly more texture, primarily through Stewie's periodic interest in Chris as an object of study or irritation rather than affection. The show has used their proximity for comedy more than for genuine character exploration. They share a father and a mother and a dog and a house. And beyond those shared facts, their relationship is largely defined by what they are not close, not involved in each other's lives, not the kind of siblings who would seek each other out in a difficult moment. What were they supposed to become? Not in the literal developmental sense. The show has answered that by not letting them develop, but in the creative sense. When the show was conceived and the Griffin family was constructed, the children presumably represented potential. Meg was a teenage girl with a relatable position, the ordinary one in an extraordinary family. Chris was a sweet, somewhat lost boy with hidden talents. Stewie was a world-conquering infant whose ambitions dwarfed his physical reality. The show found extensive material in Stewie because the character's premise was so specifically rich. It found less material in Meg and Chris, and dealt with that finding differently in each case, turning Meg into a target, turning Chris into a background presence, solving the creative limitation in two very different ways. What Meg and Chris were supposed to become the fuller versions of characters who were sketched in the early seasons and never completed is a ghost that haunts certain episodes, particularly the ones where the show remembers that these are people, not just furniture. The episodes where Meg stands up for herself. The episodes where Chris's drawing ability is taken seriously. The episodes where the siblings have a genuine interaction rather than a functional one. These episodes are reminders of what was possible and not pursued. The Griffin children are together every day. The family eats together. Sometimes. They pass each other in the hallway. They share the same walls, the same kitchen, the same staircase that leads to their respective rooms where each of them keeps whatever they keep. Stewie's weapons, Chris's drawings, Meg's whatever it is that represents Meg's interior life, which the show has given us only fragments of. They are close in proximity and unknown to each other. Like most families, in the end, number. Final extended meditation. The audience and the show. 25 years is a long time to watch something. Some of the people watching Family Guy in 2026 were not born when it premiered. Some of them were born and have grown through childhood and adolescence and into adulthood while this show ran in the background, a constant. Like a neighbor's lights that you notice every night without thinking much about what they mean. The relationship between a long-running show and its audience is one of the stranger relationships that modern media makes possible. You spend time with fictional people across decades. They become familiar in ways that real people in your life might not. Not because the fictional relationships are deeper, but because they are consistent. Stewie has been 1 year old since 1999. Peter has been making the same mistakes since 1999. Brian has been writing the same unfinished novel since 1999. These constancies are a kind of reliability that real life does not always provide. The people who have been with Family Guy from the beginning have changed significantly in the time the show has not changed. Someone who was 20 in 1999 is 46 now. They watch the show in a specific phase of their life in their early adulthood, in shared apartments, on early DVR recordings, on DVD box sets, on Adult Swim late at night. They watched it at a time when it represented something specific to them, a kind of comedy that felt sharp and new and slightly transgressive, a show that was willing to go places other shows wouldn't, a show that had characters they actually cared about. Some of those people still watch. Some of them watch and feel the gap between what the show was and what it is. Some of them have stopped watching and keep a version of the show in their memory that is not quite the current version that exists at a specific point in the show's timeline. Frozen there, the way Stewie is frozen at 1 year old. The version of Family Guy that this person carries with them from a specific period of their life. This is the show's strangest relationship with time. It cannot age its characters, but it ages its audience. The people watching Season 23 are older than the people who watched Season 1, and the show is the same characters having similar kinds of adventures in the same kinds of locations, and the gap between the aged audience and the unchanging characters is a gap that the show has no mechanism for bridging. The audience has grown, the family has not. And the watching is an experience of looking across that gap of spending time with fictional people who will be young long after the audience has stopped being young, who will be together in their unchanged house on their unchanged street long after the specific apartments and shared moments and late nights that the audience associates with the show have receded into memory. The mysteries of Family Guy, all the ones we have spent this time exploring, are mysteries that exist in a very specific relationship with an audience that has been watching them accumulate for a very long time. The Kool-Aid Man's home address matters to someone who has wondered about it since they were a teenager. Brian's age matters to someone who has watched him age while not aging since they were in college. The chicken fight matters to someone who has seen every version of it and can rank them and feel something specific when the music starts and the fists begin. The audience is part of the mystery. Their investment, their time, their willingness to keep coming back to something that they freely acknowledge has declined from a peak. This is the ongoing question that the show cannot answer about itself. Why are you still here? Because the early seasons were so good? Because the later seasons are still occasionally very good? Because 25 years of habit is difficult to break? Because the house on Spooner Street is familiar, in a way that familiarity makes meaningful, regardless of whether the reasons for the familiarity still apply? All of these, probably. None of them, maybe. The reasons for continued watching are as personal as the reasons for starting, and both are buried in the specific details of individual lives that the show has moved through without knowing the specific apartments and relationships and phases of life during which different people arrived at the show and stayed with it and are still, tonight, in the dark, in whatever room they are in, letting the questions and the voices wash over them as sleep approaches. The house is lit. The family is home. The mysteries are in the rooms, patient and permanent, waiting for another night, another episode, another insomniac hour in which someone decides to wonder about where the Kool-Aid Man goes when the cameras turn away. He goes somewhere. We will get there eventually. Good night. Number. Extended meditation. The Simpsons crossover and what it revealed. In season 13, Family Guy did something it had spent years in an adversarial posture toward. It crossed over with The Simpsons. The two shows' competitors, cultural rivals, the subjects of ongoing comparisons in which one was inevitably positioned as superior to the other, shared an episode. The Griffins traveled to Springfield. They met The Simpsons. The two families occupied the same animated space for the duration of a single half-hour. The crossover episode, titled The Simpsons Guy, aired in September 2014 and drew the largest Family Guy audience in years at that point. People showed up to see something that had seemed impossible, not technically impossible, since both shows aired on the same network, but culturally impossible in the way that things which have been rivals for long enough start to feel like they cannot coexist. The episode felt like an event because it was an event. What the episode revealed about both shows and particularly about Family Guy was interesting. When the Griffins arrived in Springfield, the joke was the contrast between the two universes. The Griffins' world is more chaotic, more cynical, more comfortable with darkness than the Simpsons' world, even though the Simpsons have their own considerable darkness. Placing Peter next to Homer made visible something about Peter that is harder to see when he is only in his own context. That Peter has become, by season 13, a genuinely more difficult character to be around than the character he was originally compared to and considered a derivation of. Homer Simpson is dumb and selfish and frequently oblivious, but there has always been a quality of warmth to Homer that survived the Simpsons' own decades-long run in ways that Peter's warmth did not survive Family Guy's. Homer loves his family with a consistency that persists through his worst behavior. When the crossover placed Peter and Homer together, Homer's fundamental decency, whatever remains of it after 30-plus seasons, was visible in contrast to something that Peter was not reliably providing. This is what a crossover does when it works as something more than a promotional event. It creates a context in which both shows can see themselves differently, in which the collision of two universes produces observations that neither universe generates on its own. The chicken fight equivalent in the crossover, the extended combat sequence between Peter and Homer, was one of the episode's most discussed elements. Here were two animated dads, the two most famous animated dads, beating each other up in an alley with a level of enthusiasm that went on long enough to become its own kind of commentary on both shows' relationship with extended physical comedy. The fight was funny and also exhausting and also, if you were willing to see it this way, a little sad. Two characters who have been doing versions of the same things for a very long time, still doing them, still generating the same responses from the same audiences, still sustained by the same premise of a dumb dad in a chaotic household, generating comedy from the collision. Meg's moment in the crossover was one of the episode's genuinely moving sequences. She encountered Lisa Simpson. Lisa, the smart, underappreciated, frequently lonely child of the Simpsons household, recognized in Meg something that Meg's own family does not recognize. She saw her. She encouraged her. She told her in the specific way that only someone who understands what it feels like to be invisible in a loud family can tell another person, "You matter." The saxophone, the talent, the genuine connection between two characters who do not normally get to have connections, this was the crossover doing something unexpected and valuable. The crossover ended the way that crossovers end, with the families returning to their respective universes, with the understanding that the two worlds cannot be permanently merged because each show's premise requires its own specific reality. The Griffins went home. The Simpsons stayed in Springfield. The things that happened between them happened and then were filed in the specific drawer of crossover continuity that both shows maintain loosely and never revisit too specifically. But the mystery the crossover generated is a good one. If these two universes can intersect, if the Griffins can drive to Springfield and meet the Simpsons and then drive home, what does that say about the geography of the animated comedy universe? Are all these shows happening in the same broad reality? Is there a Springfield on the same map as the town where the Griffins live, accessible by car if you know the route? The crossover implies yes, and the implication opens a door that neither show has the structural capacity to walk through, but which is interesting to stand in front of and wonder about. The town is on the same map as Springfield. Somewhere between those two places, there is a highway that connects them. Peter drove it once. The drive has never been repeated, and the connection between the universes has never been revisited, and both shows go on in their respective realities as if the other does not exist. But it does exist, Springfield is out there, somewhere past the state lines of a fictional Rhode Island, in whatever state Springfield is in, which has never been determined either. 2 shows worth of unsettled geography, connected by a single drive in a season 13 episode, accumulating its own set of questions that neither show has any intention of answering. Number extended meditation, the sound of the show. There is an aspect of Family Guy that gets discussed less frequently than its character choices or its narrative decisions, and that is its sound, the specific audio texture of the show that has remained more consistent than almost any other element across 25 years of production. Walter Murphy composed the show's main theme, the instantly recognizable brass and strings arrangement that plays over the opening sequence with the Griffins at their piano. The theme is one of the most recognizable in animated television. A few notes is enough to place it. A few more notes is enough to produce whatever emotional response you have accumulated around the show over however many years you have spent with it. The theme has not substantially changed since the show's premiere. It is the constant note in an otherwise variable production. The show's use of original songs, full musical numbers written and performed within episodes, is one of its more underappreciated, consistent pleasures. Seth MacFarlane is a genuinely skilled singer with a voice trained in the tradition of mid-century American popular music, and the show has used that voice across more than 25 years of episodes in ways ranging from the comedically absurd to the surprisingly sincere. The songs in Family Guy are frequently funnier than they need to be and occasionally more emotionally effective than the surrounding episode deserves. The voices, too, the specific quality of the show's primary voice cast, which has remained remarkably stable, are part of the show's audio identity in ways that go beyond simple recognition. Seth MacFarlane's Peter, MacFarlane's Brian, MacFarlane's Stewie, MacFarlane's Quagmire, 4 main characters voiced by the same person, differentiated by enough specificity that they never blur together but sharing an underlying quality that gives the show a particular vocal coherence. When you listen to Family Guy without watching it, you hear something specific that no other show produces. Alex Borstein's Lois has a quality of patient exasperation that is itself a kind of comedy, the specific sound of someone who has been dealing with this for a very long time and has not quite reached the end of their patience. Seth Green's Chris has the particular hesitant warmth of a boy who is not quite keeping up, but is trying to, which is a difficult thing to voice, and Green has done it consistently. Mila Kunis's Meg, once she settled into the role beginning in Season 2, gave the character a quality of earnest unhappiness that made the abuse. Meg received land differently than it might have with a different performance. The specific sound of someone who wants things to be okay, and has decided to believe they might still be. The recurring musical motifs, the cue that plays when Herbert appears, the specific arrangement that accompanies the chicken fights, the various leitmotifs for different recurring characters and situations are part of the show's vocabulary in a way that operates mostly below the level of conscious attention. You hear these sounds and you know what is coming. The anticipation they create is part of how the show communicates with its long-term audience, through audio signals that have accumulated meaning across years of association. The sound of Family Guy is not discussed as much as its content, because sound is harder to discuss than image, and image is harder to discuss than narrative. But the show has a distinctive audio identity that is, in its own way, as consistent as anything else about it, a sonic signature that has persisted through animation changes and writing room changes and critical reputation changes and ratings changes. Through all of the show's variations, unchanged and immediately recognizable. When you close your eyes and hear the theme, you know where you are. You are in the Griffin house. The lights are on. The family is home. The questions are in the rooms and the mysteries are in the walls. And the sound of the show is doing what it has always done, which is to say, you are here, and the story is starting, and whatever you were worried about before you sat down has been set aside, at least for now, at least for the next 22 minutes. At least for however long the episode lasts before the credits roll and the world comes back. The sound of the show is an invitation. It has been extending the same invitation since 1999. Some nights, that is exactly what you need to hear, those first few notes, and know where you are, and let the questions rise around you like water, warm and unhurried, while sleep comes in at the edges and the mysteries wait patiently for morning. Good night. This has been Uncle Guy Lore. If these questions kept you company tonight, a like means more people find their way here. Tell me where you are and what time it is in the comments. I love knowing who's out there in the dark. Subscribe if you want to be here the next time we go somewhere like this. Sleep well. Number extended meditation. The physics of the show's universe. Every fictional universe operates according to its own internal logic, and that logic does not need to match the logic of the real world. It only needs to be consistent with itself, coherent enough that the audience can navigate it without constant disorientation. Family Guy has its own physics. Not the physics of Newton or Einstein, but the physics of a specific animated universe that has been running for 25 years and has generated enough examples of how its world works that we can, if we pay enough attention, start to describe the rules. The first rule: people survive things they should not survive. This is standard for animated comedy, and Family Guy follows it, but it follows it with specific qualities that are its own. Characters fall from great heights, are hit by cars, are injured in explosions, sustain damage from the chicken fights that should be fatal several times over, and they are fine by the next scene. The resilience is not magic, exactly. It is simply the show's understanding of its own register. In the register of animated comedy, the body is durable in ways that the real body is not. Pain is real in this universe. Characters feel pain, express pain, respond to pain, but damage does not accumulate toward death the way that it does in a realistic register. Except when it does. Brian's death worked as a narrative event precisely because the show in that moment chose to exit the standard register and enter one in which damage accumulates toward permanent consequence. The show can choose which register it is operating in, and it makes that choice on an episode-by-episode basis, which is both a creative freedom and a source of tonal inconsistency. The second rule: time passes and does not pass simultaneously. The children do not age, the adults do not age. The show's universe is fixed at approximately 1999. In some respects, the Griffin children are the ages they were in the pilot and is happening in the present in other respects, responding to current events and contemporary cultural references and the specific texture of whatever year the episode was produced. This is not a paradox the show is confused about. It is a creative choice made deliberately to preserve the family dynamic while allowing the show to stay culturally current. The cost of that choice is the floating timeline, the impossibility of calculating ages, the fact that the family has been the same ages for more than a quarter-century of real time. The third rule: the supernatural is ordinary. Death exists and has a mother. An infant has a time machine. A man was transformed into a fish. A space alien lives in an attic in Virginia. A family has a dog who can speak and drive. These facts are simply the furniture of the universe. They require no explanation because in this universe, they do not require explanation. The supernatural is not exceptional. It is the background condition of existence in this fictional world. When the Kool-Aid Man crashes through the courthouse wall, the judge has already developed a policy for it. The supernatural has been here long enough to generate bureaucratic response. The fourth rule: consequences are selective. When the show wants a consequence to matter, it matters. When the show wants to reset, it resets. This is the most elastic of the rules, and it creates the most inconsistency because the audience cannot predict, from one episode to the next, whether what they are watching will have implications for the next episode or will simply not exist when the next episode begins. The show has trained its audience, over many seasons, to hold narrative developments loosely, to not invest too heavily in any specific change, because change is more likely than not to be undone. The fifth rule: the Griffin house is larger inside than outside. This is a joke the show has made explicitly, but it is also simply true of the show's physical logic. The house contains everything it needs to contain. Stewie's bedroom contains weapons, a time machine, a laboratory's worth of equipment. The show has never explained this, and the explanation is simply that the show's spatial logic is flexible enough to contain whatever the story requires in any given room. These are the laws of the Family Guy universe. They are not the laws of our universe. They are not meant to be. They are the laws of a place that exists to generate comedy and occasional genuine emotion, and the comedy and emotion that the place generates are the point, and the laws exist to serve that point rather than to describe a realistic physical reality. The universe has been running for more than 25 years. The laws have been applied consistently enough that we can describe them. The application has been inconsistent enough to generate the mysteries we have been exploring. Both things are true, and both things are part of what makes this particular fictional universe interesting enough to have warranted this much time in the dark. In whatever room you are in, on whatever night this is. Number. Extended meditation. Quagmire's apartment and the world behind the door. Glenn Quagmire lives at 29 Spooner Street, one door down from the Griffins. He has lived there for the entire run of the show. He is Peter's friend, a pilot for a major airline, and a character whose defining qualities have been maintained with more consistency than almost any other character in the show's history, for better or worse depending on your position on whether those qualities are ones you want maintained. But Quagmire's apartment is its own mystery. He lives alone. He has lived alone for the entire run of the show. No wife, no long-term relationship, no roommate, no family member occupying the space with him beyond the parade of women who visit and do not stay. He has a daughter, Anna, whose existence he was unaware of for a long time, and whose relationship with him has been explored in a small number of episodes without being made central to his ongoing story. What is in Quagmire's apartment? The show has depicted it across many episodes. But the apartment feels less like a home than like a location, a place where things happen that are thematically appropriate for Quagmire to have happen near him, but not a place that has the texture of a lived-in space the way the Griffin House does. The Griffin House has accumulated texture over 25 years. You know where the kitchen is relative to the living room. You know that Stewie's room is upstairs and that the room's back wall conceals things the family does not know are there. You know the couch and the television and the stairs. The house has the specific density of a place that has been inhabited by the same people for a long time. Quagmire's apartment has less of this. It is defined by what happens in it rather than by the particular qualities of the space. It is a location for Quagmire-adjacent events. The question of what Quagmire does in it when nothing is happening, when the show's camera has moved on to the Griffin House and Quagmire is home alone, is a question the show has never found interesting enough to pursue. He must do something. He reads, possibly. He watches television, certainly. He thinks about flying, about women, about whatever constitutes the interior life of a man whose exterior life has been the subject of comedy for more than 25 years. He has opinions about Brian Griffin that are among the most detailed and sustained opinions any character on the show has about any other character. He has a tenderness he does not often show toward his friend Joe, toward Anna, toward the occasional woman who gets close enough to see behind the character the show has built around him. The apartment holds all of this. The walls know who he is when nobody is watching. The space at 29 Spooner Street contains a version of Glenn Quagmire that the show has gestured at in individual episodes across its run, but has never sustained the version underneath the persona. The version that exists in the quiet of a well-maintained apartment on a street in Rhode Island, alone with whatever he thinks about when the audience is not there to watch. That Quagmire is the mystery of the apartment. The show keeps showing us the one it is comfortable showing. The one behind the door remains mostly where doors keep things, out of sight, present but unseen, waiting. Final note, the show continues. Season 27 is coming. The deal is signed. The show has been guaranteed a future through the 2028 to 2029 television season, which will mark the 30th anniversary of its premiere the night after Super Bowl 33, when 22 million people watched the first episode of a show that would still be running 3 decades later. The mysteries will continue to accumulate. New ones will be added. The Kool-Aid Man will continue crashing through walls and backing out of rooms. Ernie will continue healing between fights. Brian will continue being alive because Stewie went back in time and saved him, and the fact of that rescue will continue living in the structure of the show's timeline without acknowledgement. Stewie will continue being 1-year-old. The house at 31 Spooner Street will continue to be lit. The people in it will continue to be who they are imperfectly, inconsistently, with the specific variable quality of a show that has been made by many different sets of hands across many different years and contains within it all of those hands and all of those years and all of the questions those hands and years produced. Somewhere in Rhode Island, a town exists that is not on any real map. Its geography is impossible to fully trace. Its physics are different from ours. Its residents are unchanged by time in ways that no real person can claim. And in the dark, in whatever room you are in tonight, the questions from that place have kept you company across however long this has taken. That is enough. That is what this kind of watching is for. The show continues. The questions remain. And somewhere in the dark, just past the edge of sleep, the Kool-Aid Man is waiting near a public building, and the sounds that will launch him through another wall are coming, not yet, but coming, and when they arrive, he will be ready. He is always ready. Good night. This has been Uncle Guy Lore. Leave me your location and time in the comments. I genuinely read everyone. If you made it this far, a subscribe means you will be here the next time. Sleep well.